Would you like to see it scrapped altogether? Is it outmoded? Should it go? Let us know your views on that one. And finally, Nigel avoids the chop in the jungle. He rumbles on in the jungles. Frankie Dettori was the first to fall. Now it's Operation Save Nigel. Your country needs you. All that coming up in this hour. So I think I just saw Lee Anderson Hove interview. What would you like to ask him? What would you like to put to the Conservative Party? Do you think today's announcement on Rwanda, on salary caps, do you think that would be enough, or is it too little too late? Is your vote going to go forever? And of course, on the BBC licence fee, let me know if you've stopped paying the fee and why. What was it that put you off the BBC? The politics? Was it the salaries of the megastars? Or was it the fact they threatened to put pensioners in jail? Get in touch throughout the show and I'll read out all of the best comments. GBViews@gbnews.com. That's all coming up in the next hour. But first, here's your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Home Secretary is expected to announce new measures to bring down legal migration after record high arrivals to the UK last year. It's understood James Cleverly will raise the minimum salary requirement for skilled workers from overseas to around £38,000. It follows the Prime Minister's promise to do what's necessary to bring down net migration after official figures hit a record high of 745,000 last year. Downing Street says the new measures will focus on clamping down on abuse in the legal migration system. Meanwhile, Downing Street has rejected claims that the government will give Rwanda another £15 million to sign a new immigration treaty. It's understood the Home Secretary is close to finalising the plan after the Supreme Court ruled against it in November. The agreement could see British lawyers sent to Rwanda to advise judges on asylum cases. The Prime Minister says the BBC should be realistic about what people can afford amid reports of a planned increase to the TV licence fee. It's currently £159 per year, but it's thought the corporation wants to hike the charge by as much as 9% next year to just over £173. The Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser says the planned rise would be very high amid cost of living pressures. GB News understands a broadcaster could be forced to accept a lower increase. Sir Keir Starmer says the Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. Speaking at the economy inquiry in London, Sir Keir has pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. It's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. But Sir Keir promised Labour would be obsessed with the economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
The president of the COP28 climate summit in Dubai says he's surprised by reports suggesting that he denies a key aspect of climate science. Sultan Al Jaber was criticised in November after he said there was no scientific basis for limiting a rise in global temperatures to 1.5%. Speaking at the summit today, he said his comments were taken out of context in an attempt to undermine the aim of the conference. He reiterated his full belief in climate science.
And I have repeatedly said in many occasions and in many different platforms that it is the science that have guided the principles of our strategy as COP28 presidency. And I've been very crystal clear about that, and I hope that this time I am clearer in getting this message across.
The Ministry of Defence's plan for new weapons has a budget black hole of £16.9 billion. The National Audit Office said the MOD's 10-year programme until 2033 was unaffordable and the projected deficit is the biggest since 2012. It puts the estimated cost at more than £300 billion against a budget of just over £288 billion. Almost £4 billion is being put into a rail project for the north of England. Ministers are promising to invest £3.9 billion to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route connecting Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. It's after the Prime Minister scrapped the northern leg of the HS2 route between Manchester and Birmingham this year. A number of Tory MPs are calling for a new body to help infected blood victims, with some backbenchers set to join forces with Labour on payouts over the scandal. Thousands of people contracted HIV and hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. Reports suggest that ministers are unlikely to shift their positions while the inquiry is ongoing. But Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves confirmed Labour will support an amendment with the body created to pay out compensation. And more than 30 flood warnings have been issued as the risk of snow subsides. Heavy rains expected across large parts of the UK. It follows a night of sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfall in the north, with nearly 40 schools closed in Cumbria. The yellow alerts for rain are in place across southern England, south-east Wales and into the Midlands until 6 o'clock tonight. A yellow rain warning is also in place for north-east England until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now we start with the migrant crisis, and the Home Secretary James Cleverly is set to announce plans to reduce legal migration. We will bring you that live on GB News later in the show. In the meanwhile, I'm joined by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, great expectations is the phrase that leaps to mind as we approach Christmas. Lots of promises have been made on salary caps, 38 grand, on the absolute caps on numbers, and also tougher action on Rwanda, promises of boots on the ground. What do we expect? And more to the point, do we think it'll be enough?
Well, they're hoping, of course, to think about. I'm telling you my Dickens analogies for you, Martin. You've stumped me there slightly, but it's more like there won't be a ghost of a Christmas past here for the Prime Minister. He's trying to look forward into the future and find a way to tackle spiralling net migration, legal migration, and of course the issue of the cross-border boats coming across the English Channel. Now, there are two things happening this week, and it's a massive week on migration for the Prime Minister. The first issue is today. They're going to try and work out how to control net migration. More than 700,000, of course, arrived here in the year to the end of last year, at the end of last December, forgive me. And the idea is to bring that number down. They're going to look at lifting the minimum salary required to get a visa from around 26,000 a year to 38,000 a year. That'll essentially return it to where it was pre-EU referendum in 2016, making it into more of a graduate visa. So highly skilled people can come here with degrees, but lower skilled workers can't. The challenge the government's got is how to fill these 1 million vacancies in the workforce. There are 6 million working age people at home who aren't working, some on benefits, some aren't. The government wants to get more of them into work, and the challenge is going to be how to make that happen and don't damage the economy, because of course the Treasury likes to have a number of migrants coming in, maybe around 250,000 a year, to ensure we have economic growth. So they're going to tweak the way you can come to this country legally. Also probably look at banning maybe in other areas of the economy, not just students, people bringing in family members, which might increase numbers that way. The second part of this attempt at controlling migration this week is on the Rwanda plan. Now, don't forget the Supreme Court ruled out the Rwanda plan, saying that elements of it were in conflict with UK and EU ECHR, human rights laws. They want to move people back into Rwanda and process their claims in Rwanda, make that happen, but they want to stop lawyers stopping that happening. So they want to reassure judges that if that happens, people who go to Rwanda won't be sent back to the country they're fleeing from and won't be in harm's way there. So there's two big things happening. Today is this legal migration crackdown. Probably Thursday we'll see more on this Rwanda treaty and new emergency legislation to overrule the EU, ECHR, the European Convention of Human Rights, to allow this Rwanda plan to happen. If this comes off, then it may be that Rishi Sunak by next spring has finally got a grip on the issue of migration, and that might be a stick with which to beat Labour come the next election.
OK, Chris, thanks for that update. And of course, we'll be crossing live to you for the reaction to James Cleverly's speech due, and I think in about an hour's time. Thank you. Now, I'm joined in the studio by the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, none other than Mr Lee Anderson. Lee, always a pleasure. So you heard what was going on there. You've just been in chamber. We're looking forward to this speech this afternoon from Mr Cleverly. I guess the question I put to you, the one I put to Chris, is it too little too late? 745,000 via the front door this year, let alone the back door. But do you think you can turn this around?
It's never too late, Martin. We cannot let this go on. It's unsustainable. The figures are more than alarming. You know, the people in this country are a little bit fed up. We've promised, all governments have promised really, to bring migration down. We've not, we've failed. It's increasing pressures on public services, as you know. In my area, Ashfield, you know it very well, Martin, you're from that neck of the woods. You know, try and get a doctor's appointment, try and get your kiddie into school, try and get that dental appointment. It's very, very difficult, and people are getting a little bit angry. They're very grumpy, and they're fed up now with, you know, with the migration figures as they are. They want to see action, and quite rightly so.
Astonishing at the weekend, Keir Starmer flashing his garter to the Red Wall, saying that the Tories have betrayed voters on immigration and Brexit. You might have a few words to say about that.
Well, I mean, another bandwagon for Sir Keir to leap on, as Sir Flip-Flop, as we call him. Look, he's playing politics. There's even a Thatcherite now, I see in the papers this week, is claiming to be a big fan of Margaret Thatcher. I don't think anybody takes him seriously. The thing is, Martin, when I'm out and about in Ashfield, knocking on doors and speaking to real people in the real world, yes, they're a little bit grumpy with us over the migration, but there's no love for Starmer. We own it not just in Ashfield, but all over the country. It's seen as being a little bit slippery. He'll jump on any bandwagon possible. And, you know, when he starts taking the lead on migration, this is a man who wanted open borders, by the way. You know, a big Brexiteer, voted against leaving the European Union on numerous occasions. Nobody takes him seriously.
They haven't even offered an alternative yet, have they? Is that having to come? Because, I mean, they keep saying they're going to clamp down on the human traffickers, on the smuggling gangs, but no one's ever managed to do that so far. Are voters in Ashfield saying to you, we haven't heard any detail from Labour? Well,
you look in the chamber this week, you'll hear Labour MP after Labour MP, they'll bang on about 13 years of Tory rule. But we've had 13 years of Labour opposition and not one single plan, not one single solution. So, you know, coming up to the election, Martin, next year, whenever it'll be, they're going to have to reveal their hand at some stage, and so far they haven't. They haven't got a plan, they haven't got no policies. I mean, it's coming out as a Thatcherite. It's like in some of our policies. He might as well just come and join our party.
The funny thing, I want to ask you about this Thatcherite thing, because, as you say, I know that area, you were a miner, my dad was a miner. The T word was something you avoided.
It was like the plague. I mean, I say this on my weekly rounds. I go to members up and down the country. You know, we hated Maggie with the passion in the Red Wall areas because of our pits. But when you look, you know, history will tell you that actually Harold Wilson closed more pits than Margaret Thatcher. And when you look at the state of the country at the time, the country needed Maggie to come along. It took me a long time to forgive Maggie for what happened in our areas. Because we, to be honest, Martin, we faced the brunt of it. We had the pit closures, the factory closures, we had the deprivation. It took us donkey's years to get over that.
In actual fact, 2019, I think, well, you know, we both know, was the time when people finally put that to bed.
Yeah.
In a sense, that was the election that broke that cycle of holding on to the past.
Yeah.
So is it wise or is it really foolish of Starmer to attempt to revive it? It's gone down like a cup of cold sick in his own party.
Well, it will do. I mean, you see some of the lefties now in his own party there. I mean, I've seen Ian Lavery, he was having a pop at him on Twitter earlier today saying, you know, he was having to go at Starmer's comments over Margaret Thatcher. Look, people voted Conservative for the first time in the Red Wall in places like Ashfield, where you stood, Martin, and I think people over a period of time have been looking for an excuse to vote Conservative, but never really could. But the Brexit, the Boris, the Jeremy Corbyn thing, that was sort of that mix together gave people that perfect excuse to vote for Tory. And, you know, and when Sir Keir comes out and trying to make out is a big Thatcherite, it's not cutting no ice, mate. It's silly.
Do you think Brexit will still be an issue on the doorstep? Because he brings up Brexit, and we all remember, of course, he was the campaign leader of the People's Vote to reverse Brexit.
He was. I mean, the Brexit vote for a lot of people, it wasn't all about immigration, but for a lot of people, it was immigration. You know, they wanted to, they saw. And Labour Party and the left will always call you racist and bigoted and fascist or whatever. People were seeing communities where people overnight were speaking different languages they couldn't understand. They were going into their town centres where they were in the minority. The English language was in the minority. Now, people don't like fast change. They don't like quick change. They like things to happen gradually. And that's not the integration that the people in Ashfield wanted to see. When you go into Mansfield or Ashfield or Eastwood Town Centre or wherever, and you see, here, English as the minority language, if you like, people are not racist to be unhappy about that. They just don't want that change at that pace, Martin. It's as simple as that.
Nevertheless, the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, and particularly the legal route is what's concerning people. When you look at the numbers, especially dependents, Lee, 154,000 dependents of skilled workers, 96,000 dependents of students. How can it be the case? I understand the student dependence is going to be reviewed. Maybe we'll get more detail later on from James Cleverly on that. But how can it be that someone comes to study in Britain, they're allowed to bring their kids or their missus with them?
They shouldn't, mate. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's sort of a backdoor way of getting people in. And we know some of these courses Mickey Mouse courses. We know it's been happening. It's got to stop, and hopefully James will come out with some sensible solutions today. I'm pretty sure he will, because, as you know, Martin, over the past few weeks, this has been the #1 topic, and we've got to act, because at the moment the public are running out of patience with us. We've promised to bring migration down. There's been a realisation now that it is far too high. It's got to come down, definitely before the next election, both legal and illegal migration. We've got to get his finger out and sort it out.
Is it true to say that the Brexit divide that existed within the Conservative Party in 2019 seems to have manifested itself again on an immigration divide? A place like Ashfield,
yeah,
where it impacts people directly in terms of doctor's appointments, schools, and all that stuff we talk about, versus the more rural shires where they're more progressive and they're in danger of losing their seats to Liberal Democrats. Is that divide a real thing?
I think there's a divide in Parliament, Martin, the whole of Parliament. There's a school of thought in Parliament that the more immigrants that you bring in, the more productive you get. I don't believe that at all. I think it's nonsense. In business, private business, they always try to produce more, do more with the same amount of people or less people. That's how you become more productive. There is a reason why we have a tractor in a field now lifting potatoes up rather than 100 men breaking the back. That's more productive, and we have to do that with society as well.
Do you think that it's too late for the Conservatives? I know you're a glass half full individual, but the polling is looking pretty chilling. There's a lot of talk about Rishi's popularity as a Prime Minister isn't very high. It has to be shared. Conservative Home today have him down on the canvas, really.
Yeah. But Martin, as well as I know, yes, people are grumpy, people are a bit fed up. We've been in power for 13 years. But you know what? People will tend to judge political parties probably on the last 6 months of government. They will look at what they've got in the pocket. They'll look if they can get a school place. They'll look if they can get a doctor's appointment. They'll look if things are rosy. It's that last 6 months, which is an election, which is really key. So if we get this sorted, I think we can win the next election. So
in Ashfield in 2019, it was really clear. It was get Brexit done. You were talking about foreign aid. In fact, when your leaflet come through my mum's door, I was like, well, I can't beat this bloke. You're obviously going to win that seat. But this time round, the landscape's quite different. What do you see, apart from immigration, has been the key things you're going to fight Ashfield on?
Well, immigration is the #1 issue in my inbox, but it's pound notes, Martin, in people's pockets. It's always the economy. It trumps everything. If people think they're better off, if people think the future's rosy, if they think the kids have got a good future, they want to rock the boat, they'll come out and vote for me. And I'm looking to get re-elected, basically, on my own personal record as well, getting records amount of investment, and I'm hoping, being Ashfield born and bred and living there all my life, that people come out and put the faith in me.
The party's divided, we've just talked about, and there's rumblings in the junglings down under, of course. There's a lot of talk. In fact, even Rishi said we're a broad church. You know Nigel, you like Nigel.
I like Nigel, yeah.
Do you think there could be a future with Farage in the big chair? And if so, is that a party you'd welcome? Well,
Nigel, he says he's a Conservative. I think he is a Conservative, actually. He's been in the Conservative Party before. Look, if you applied to join the Conservative Party, if you moved to Ashfield and applied to join in, I'd probably say no, because it'd be after my job. But, I think he's a great Conservative, and I think the party would probably welcome him.
Do you think the voters would? Do you think the Conservative voters, many of whom are saying a lot of the Conservatives don't feel like true Conservatives, the blue-collar Conservatives, the working-class Conservatives, do you think they'd hoover up the Farage message?
Maybe. He imagines himself as a true Conservative. I think he is. He's got a lot of... I don't agree with everything he says, and I don't agree with everything the Reform Party says, but, there's a market there, Martin, for that sort of politics, and he taps into that, and some people might say it's populist politics. I don't say it is. I say, if you're saying things that are popular, then go for it. I mean, they're only popular because people want those policies.
Yeah, yeah. Now, at the top of the show, Lee, before you came down, I put it out to the viewers, what would you ask Lee Anderson? I've got one question here from Lynn. She says, Martin, can you please ask why Reform are not attacking the Labour Party? If Reform could push out Labour and become the opposition, we would have a government and opposition that both allegedly want immigration reform. So I guess Lynn's point is, why Reform having a pop at the Tories when you seem to agree?
Let's be honest, Martin, let's be honest, you're a political commentator. I know what Reform are up to. I've got great respect for Richard Tice and Ben Habib and Nigel, but it's been quite clear from day one they want a Labour government, and they're under some sort of illusion that a Labour government will bring in proportional representation, which at another election in 5-10 years' time will give Reform 35 votes. But the problem with that, 35 seats. The problem with that, when you're getting 5 million, 6 million votes and you get 35 seats, the Greens are going to get 35, and the Lib Dems, God forbid, are going to get 35. Then you're into hung Parliament coalition territory, and nothing ever gets done.
There's been a lot of talk about people changing parties without going into any details. Is that something that could happen?
I've already changed parties once, Martin. I changed from the Labour Party to the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party gave me a home when I was politically homeless. They protected me. They wrapped their arms around me. They gave me a chance to stand in my own constituency in 2019. I'm going nowhere. If other people want to move, that's up to them. But I don't think they are, Martin. You know, live by the sword, die by the sword.
There's a lot of people who'll be watching this show, Lee, that are a big fan of yours, but they're wobbling about where to place their cross in the box with the Conservative Party. If you're going to pitch to the many thousands of people watching this show now about why they should stick with the True Blues, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, Martin, before I got elected, I'd never been to the House of Commons. And when I got there the Monday morning, I sit on those green benches, as I do every single day, and I look opposite at the Labour MPs. And let me tell you, there's not much talent on those benches, and I dread it in the future, in maybe a year's time or more, that there could be another 100 of those talentless, anti-British, you know, the socialists, the Palestine flag waving, whatever they are. It frightens me to death. It frightens me to death, Martin, and I would do my utmost to keep that shower out of power.
We'll have to leave it there. Lee Anderson, fighting talk as ever. Superb stuff. Thanks for joining us in the studio today. Lee Anderson, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, MP for Ashfield. OK, moving on. Rishi Sunak could block a 9% increase in the cost of the BBC licence fee. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels, we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting
every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 3:26. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, later this hour, we'll have the latest on the freezing cold weather that's hit parts of the UK and find out how you can help Nigel Farage be crowned the King of the Jungle. Now to the controversy over the BBC licence fee, and Rishi Sunak could block a 9% increase to the cost of that licence fee. At the moment, it's 159 quid, but had it been due to go up in line with inflation next April, what he likes to hear so much, he's still here, the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, still in the studio. You've got your taxi waiting, Lee, but I knew you couldn't resist having a little comment on the BBC licence fee. It's something you've been very outspoken about in the past in terms of its political stance, in terms of the drama and the big salaries of people like Captain Lineker.
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of colleagues may disagree with me, Martin, but I think it's time the BBC licence was scrapped. I think it's probably the only product in this country where you're forced to buy. And I don't want to buy it, and I'm not paid for my TV licence for probably 4 or 5 years now, and I've made that statement in Parliament. I think when you look at the taxpayer, for me, is being hoodwinked out 159 quid to listen to people like Lineker spout his nonsense, and he gets £1.3 million a year, I think, and there's other people in the BBC getting massive salaries when people can barely afford to pay the TV licence. Look, it's supposed to be an impartial organisation. Anybody with an ounce of common sense watching the news, what they put out, knows it's not impartial. We've seen that over the past few weeks with the nonsense they're putting out in Israel. And it's time that it was brought into line and people were given that choice to subscribe to the BBC. And I bet if they did, you know, they wouldn't be paying people £1 million a year.
And it's interesting, don't you think, Lee, that the sorts of people that live in your constituency often feel denigrated by the BBC, and particularly elder Conservatives, who are the most likely people to watch the BBC. My kids don't watch telly full stop, apart from when I'm on. And even
it's not just natural Conservatives as well, Martin. It's some of the first-time Tory voters as well. People like my parents who are watching the BBC, who are fed up with it now. They turn it off. They'll put GB News on. GB News is on the loop most of the time in my parents' house. They don't watch the BBC because they can see you've got these middle-class lefties that's presenting, you know, the news and current affairs programmes. The bias is quite plain to see, and it puts people off. It's not clever, it's not big, and it's not clever, because we'll see in 2027, when it's up for renewal, the agreement with government, if it goes to a subscription service, I'm convinced, Martin, that there'll be more people watching GB News than is the BBC.
Well, I'd like to think that's right. But back to the point we made before about Brexit and immigration, on the BBC also, it's fair to say there are still a fair tranche of Tories that support the BBC and all it stands for. Is this another wedge issue within the party? Is there enough momentum within the party to pull that Royal Charter back?
Well,
or is kind of rattling your sabre on the licence fee, capping that enough?
I think there's a little bit of nostalgia there, Martin. We talk about the BBC. We think about Anti-Beeb of previous years when it was a great corporation that did great things. It was impartial. You know, we're of a similar... I'm a little bit older than you, but I remember a time in the 70s and 80s growing up when you couldn't for the life of you think which way a TV presenter or a newsreader voted. But now it's out there for all to see. And maybe we are a little bit blinkered. Maybe we're harping on for a BBC of the past. That's gone. It's quite clear that's gone, and it's a different organisation as it was many, many years ago.
So you'd like to defund the BBC?
Yeah, I'd like it to be a subscription service, and give people a choice, a clear choice. If you want to watch it, pay for it. It's as simple as that, Martin. OK, Lee Anderson, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, MP for Ashfield. Once again, thanks for joining us on GB News. I think your taxi's waiting now, Captain. You can clear off. Thank you very much. Yeah, your excuse. Thank you very much. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, including our reporter Will Hollis will have all the latest on the chaos caused by heavy snow. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer says the Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. Speaking at the Economy Inquiry in London, Sir Keir has pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. It's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. But Sir Keir promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
Well, the Home Secretary is expected to announce new measures to bring down legal migration after record high arrivals to the UK last year. It's understood James Cleverly will raise the minimum salary requirement for skilled workers from overseas to around £38,000. It follows the Prime Minister's promise to do what's necessary to bring down net migration after official figures hit a record high of 745,000 last year. Downing Street says the new measures will focus on clamping down on abuse in the legal migration system. Meanwhile, it's understood the Home Secretary will head to Rwanda to finalise a new agreement that could see British lawyers advising on asylum cases. Downing Street has rejected claims it will give Rwanda another £15 million to sign the treaty after reports that it would come in addition to the existing £140 million scheme. The Prime Minister says the BBC should be realistic about licence fee increases. It's currently £159 per year, but it's thought the corporation wants to hike the charge by as much as 9% next year to just over £173. The Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser says the planned rise would be very high amid cost of living pressures. GB News understands the broadcaster could be forced to accept a lower increase. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2630 and €1.1664. The price of gold is £1,623.49 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,512 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Welcome back. Thank you, Tatiana. Now, anti-terrorism prosecutors have opened an investigation after a man armed with a knife and a hammer killed a German tourist and left 2 people, including a British man, wounded near the Eiffel Tower in Paris on Saturday night. Organisers and politicians now face questions over security ahead of the 2024 Olympics. Well, I'm joined now by reporter Charlie Peters in the studio. Charlie, a harrowing incident dealt with swiftly, but I believe there's another element to this, and that is the French authorities are clamping down on these kind of terror attacks in a way that we don't seem to be able to do or don't want to do in Britain.
Well, actually, the day before this terror attack happened, the French Interior Ministry announced that they were going to deport an Uzbek national in France who had been linked to terror organisations, despite the European Court of Human Rights preventing this from taking place. Now, of course, that is a very significant step by the French authorities to override the ECHR and make a move to do what the Interior Ministry said, prioritising French security and French lives over the human rights of terrorists. Now, this comes at a time when much of the continent, Europe, is slowing down how it allows migrants into their borders. There has been a hardening of the Schengen area in many countries, particularly those bordering Russia, but also down in the south affected by migration from North Africa. And much of the justification for the tightening of those borders has been terror-related. And France, in particular, has had a torrid year of terrorism. This attack on Saturday, one German national killed and one British man injured, is the second terror attack in France where Britons have been hurt. Let's not forget, in July, a Syrian national on a knife attack in southern France injured a British girl. So a really appalling year for terrorism in France. And it does seem that they've turned the corner under the Liberal government of Emmanuel Macron, saying, actually, we've got to get these people out of our country.
Charlie Peters, thank you for that update. And it begs the question, doesn't it? You know, if the French can override the ECHR, if they can kick these terrorists out of their country, why can't we? Why aren't we doing the same? We're not even a member of the EU anymore. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Moving on. Heavy rain is expected to hit the UK after harsh wintry conditions over the weekend left many properties in the UK without power and some unlucky motorists in the Lake District stranded in their cars. Now, the Met Office has issued nearly 30 flood warnings across the UK with heavy rain expected across the country. Well, let's cross now to Matlock in Derbyshire, an area I know very well, and speak to our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. Will, Matlock Bath. Will they be taking a bath in rain at this rate?
Yes, very pretty, very picturesque, especially with the snow-covered hills. But for the drivers and people simply trying to get about to do their shopping, is not a nice place to be right now. The snow that has been falling all over the weekend, it started to melt because of the rain that's been coming in. It's sort of a slush, but lots of ice underneath it from where people have been standing on it, and a few people have taken we'll call it a tumble in the background earlier today. It is essentially warning, warning, warning. That's the message that's being put out by the Met Office and the UK Health and Security Agency. First of all, the Met Office, there are 3 yellow weather warnings in place across the UK. A yellow weather warning for ice, that's in the very tip of Scotland. There's also a yellow weather warning for rain, that's in northeast England, places like Newcastle and Middlesbrough. And then another yellow weather warning for rain down in the South Wales, as well as Somerset and Dorset, and that's where those flood warnings are coming in, brought in by the Environment Agency. You said 30 a minute ago. I just checked my phone just before we started speaking. It's now 40 or so flood warnings because that rain is so torrential in parts of Britain. So that means when you have a flood warning that there is flooding expected, so people should be looking towards their action plans. We know flooding from the last couple of weeks. We've seen a lot of it recently here in Britain. The UK Health and Security Agency, they've put in health alerts for the cold. There's an amber health alert for cold in the north east of England, for Yorkshire, for the Midlands where I am today, and then a yellow lesser warning for parts of the south. That's really for people that are slightly older, as well as people that have cardiovascular problems, health concerns. Whenever there is a severe weather, like severe cold that we've been experiencing, that's when those health alerts come into place for people that are a little bit more vulnerable, homeless people as well. But for people that have been driving, trying to get around on the road, the RAC has said that for those people, particularly in the north, it is like driving on an ice rink. A lot of the snow and the ice has gone from parts of central England, but for the northeast, where there's been a lot of problems, for the northwest, where there's been power cuts, there is some quite difficult last few hours for this weather that we've been experiencing, Martin.
OK, Will Hollis, thanks for that update. Matlock Bath, of course, a fantastic destination for motorcyclists, but I won't bother getting the bike out in this weather. Stay safe out there, please, everybody. Thank you very much, Will. Now, moving on, Sir Keir Starmer has had some harsh words for the Tories' handling of the economy today. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
To the week to come. So kick back.
Welcome back. It's 3:43. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, at 4 o'clock, I'll have the latest on the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. But this Parliament is on track to be the first government in history where living standards have contracted. The words of Sir Keir Starmer earlier while speaking at an event hosted by the economic think tank, the Resolution Foundation. Announcing this is Britain going backwards. The Labour leader announced that growth is essential, but spending taps won't be turned on.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
An obsession? Well, Starmer's speech follows a report from the think tank which suggests that the UK has experienced 15 years of declining productivity and growth and flatlining wages. But while speaking at the same event this morning, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt argued that the evidence was an unfair representation of the economy as it was pre his autumn statement for growth.
The way in the long run that you can raise living standards is by raising productivity. Now, I don't blame the Resolution Foundation for the fact that they went to print days before the autumn statement. But we did introduce in the autumn statement the most competitive business investment reliefs in the world, matched only amongst OECD countries by Latvia and Estonia, with full expensing.
I guess all kicking off about the economy, and joining me now is GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. So Liam, first shots fired in the economics war of the next general election, but who's talking sense? Starmer talks great rhetoric, but is there any detail?
There's lots of positioning going on here, Martin, in terms of the economy ahead of a general election, penciled in maybe for May next year, maybe for October next year, but certainly by this time next year, I think we'll have had a general election, almost certainly. And what Keir Starmer is trying to do, he's almost saying to the left wing of his Labour Party, attack me, attack me. He was in the papers over the weekend lauding Margaret Thatcher.
Astonishing.
Crikey. And I know you've been talking about that on your show. Why is he doing that? To wind up the left of his party so they attack him, so then he can turn around and say to, you know, the rest of the UK, you see, I'm actually challenging the hard left of my party because I'm on your side. Tony Blair did exactly the same thing in 94, 95, 96, and I remember it well. Let's see what Keir Starmer actually said. I've got some quotes here. He said about the economy, we are in a hole. There's no doubt about it. Taxes are higher than at any time since the war, none of which was true in 2010, which, of course, is when Labour lost the election. Never before has a British government asked its people to pay so much for so little, saying, we all know that public services aren't always the best. And then Keir Starmer went on to say, and you alluded to this earlier, economic growth will have to become Labour's obsession if we're to turn around the economy. He's sounding a bit like Liz Truss there, isn't he? This has not always been within the Labour Party's comfort zone. What he's trying to do, as well as attacking, as well as like winding up the left so they attack him so he can claim that he's different from them and he'll keep them under wraps, he's also trying to put in the public's mind the idea, if there is austerity, if there is low government spending after the next general election, it's not Labour's fault. You may remember, I know you're a student of politics, quite a few years ago when Labour lost in 2010, there was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, my near namesake, a guy called Liam Byrne, Birmingham MP, and he famously left this note, Dear Tories, I'm sorry, there's no more money. Right? And I think this is kind of what Starmer's trying to do. He's trying to say to the public, the economy's in the hole, it's because of the Tories, it's actually because of the global financial crisis in 2008. So we've never really recovered from that.
And all the spending during the pandemic.
And all the spending during the pandemic. And he's trying to get it into the public's mind and into the mind of journalists that they are getting a really bad inheritance. Tony Blair, in 97, inherited an economy that was in good shape. The public finances were in good shape after Ken Clarke's stewardship as Chancellor, and Gordon Brown could afford to start spending. That is not the case. In 2010, that year again, UK's public sector debt was about 650 billion quid. By the end of this decade, it's going to be 3 trillion. Crikey, 600 billion versus 3,000 billion. So the government won't have much room for manoeuvre, whether it's a Tory government or a Labour government. We're already spending about 10% of tax revenue on servicing our public debt. So I think this is quite a canny speech by Keir Starmer. And, you know, the Resolution Foundation, it's run by a guy who used to advise Ed Miliband, of course, a former Labour leader. But I don't think, in fairness to him, and he's a decent guy, you could say that their analysis is particularly party-pre. When it comes to the numbers, they tell it as it is.
We're going to want to see some detail, aren't we? It's all fair and well saying the biscuit tin's empty, it was their fault, it's nothing to do with us, Governor, honest, even though, of course, it probably was, because Starmer's party backed all of these spending and the taxes and the printing of money during the COVID lockdown. So will it wash just to blame the other lot, or do we want to see some meat on the bone? What's your actual plan?
Well, as the election approaches, and as I say, it could be 6 months, it could be 11 months, we don't know, or anything in between. As the election approaches, I think that Labour are going to come under more and more pressure to reveal their hand when it comes to the details of their spending plans. But they say to me, I talk to Labour's top people all the time, they say to me, and understandably so, there's no way we're going to outline exactly what we're going to do until we publish our manifesto, because the Tories will just nick our best policies and put them in their manifesto. What I would say, though, is I know the Labour Party at the highest level is considering doing what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, again, and they're advised by Peter Mandelson now, Keir Starmer, right? Lots of new Labour figures are knocking about. I know the Labour Party at the highest level are considering matching the Tories' spending plans. That means that, again, it will wind up the left of their party because they want much bigger government spending, but then they'll be able to say to the public, you can't say that we're spendthrift, we're the Labour Party, we're actually time for a change and we won't blow up the economy by spending too much. It's all about positioning and trying to change public perceptions of the Labour Party.
Superb analysis, as ever. Liam Halligan, always on the money. Thanks, mate. Cheers. Now, to some alarming figures on the UK's obesity crisis. It's costing the country almost £100 billion a year. 2/3 of British people are now overweight, and I'm joined by Steve Miller, who is a weight loss expert who used to present Fat Families. Steve, I've been looking forward to talking to you all day on this because I know you're going to talk straight and I know you're going to talk some common sense. The fact of the matter is we are getting bigger as a nation. We are now ranked second only to the supersized United States of America. And yet the plans that are coming out of this is ban fast food, more taxation. Surely the solution is a bit more tough love with the public.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, we've developed a culture where it's kind of cool to be a chubster, and we've been doing that for quite a long time now. And like I've said many times, we've gone from the normal catwalk to the fat walk. We unfortunately in the UK have normalised obesity. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a certain amount of people that struggle emotionally and psychologically. But from my experience of 20 years, I can tell you now that the vast majority of people are too fat because they haven't got the self-motivation. And quite frankly, they need a rocket. Now, I understand that there is all this talk about fat tax, but you see, it failed completely in Denmark. It was a complete and utter disaster. It increased inflation, and the report 18 months on from implementing this fat tax was clear that 80% of people had not changed their eating habits for the better. It was a flop, so they ditched it. And frankly, I think right now, the last thing the British public need is yet more tax from this lot, because they seem to be high. Well, they're high on woke and high on tax, aren't they? So, yes, we do need a bit of tough love as well. Absolutely.
OK, Steve, we've only got about 30 seconds, but if you're in control, what would you do?
Oh, I would get rid of all this woke culture, absolutely. I'd also, on a positive, I would partner the supermarkets as well to close that excuse that it costs too much to eat healthily, because that's a load of old baloney when you look down deep. So, yes, there's lots we can do. And also I would ban all of this plus-size modelling claptrap, you know, where if you're happy and you're fat, you clap your hands in a magazine.
Steve Miller, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to that all day, and you delivered. Thank you, as ever. Superb stuff. Now, my colleague Nigel Farage is, of course, currently starring in I'm a Celebrity. And the king of Brexit wants to become the king of the jungle. He has this message for you.
I'm asking you to vote Remain. No, seriously, vote for me to remain in the jungle. Now, the easiest way to do it is to get the I'm a Celebrity app. That gives you 5 free votes, or you can phone or text.
And there we go. If you wanted Redditors to vote for Farage, you need to grab your phone, scan that QR code that's on screen right now, and download the app. As Nigel just said, you can vote for him 5 times per day, and that's free. Now, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, is set to announce plans to reduce legal migration. We'll be live to bring you that at GB News later on. We'll cross over to the House of Commons for that. The big question is, will it be enough? Will it be too little, too late? I put it to Lee Anderson, Deputy Chairman of the party, earlier on. He thinks there's still time to turn it around. What do you think? Will there be enough today for this to satiate you? We'll have all that later. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It stays wet for the rest of today in many places with a lot of cloud cover, but colder and clearer conditions remain in the far north, and they will spread a bit more widely overnight and into Tuesday. We've got an area of low pressure tracking along southern parts and various weather systems wrapped around it, giving outbreaks of prolonged rain, especially for northeast England, southeast Scotland, risk of localised flooding here. And that combined with snowmelt could lead to some large accumulations. Elsewhere, outbreaks of rain continuing overnight for the Midlands, parts of Wales and the southwest turning more showery later. But for northern Scotland, we've got rain and sleet showers combined with plummeting temperatures, so some icy patches first thing Tuesday here. And a frosty start for central and northern Scotland, as well as for parts of western Northern Ireland. That's where the coldest weather will be. The cold but clear conditions in the north eventually replace the grey but mild conditions elsewhere. The rain in the east turns to showers by the afternoon, drier and brighter further west with some sunny spells, and highs of 7 to 9 Celsius in the south, 3 or 4 further north. And then those temperatures fall away widely on Wednesday morning with widespread frost, some freezing fog patches first thing as well, for example, through the Vale of York, central and southern Scotland. Before the next area of rain moves in, that will lead to some hill snow in the north on Wednesday night into Thursday, milder by the end of the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome to the show. It's 4 o'clock, this is GB News and I'm Martin Daubney. Loads coming up in the next 2 hours. This hour, top story is today, do or die time for the Conservatives once again on migration. We're crossing shortly to the Commons. James Cleverly is about to give a speech setting out some key details on salary caps, on migration caps, on dependence, on Rwanda. Will it work or is it too little too late? Next story, the BBC licence fee. What do you think about it? Rishi Sunak has said he's going to cap it and not put through a 9% inflation-busting rise to that. But do you think it's actually had its day? Is it unfair? Does it prop up people like Gary Lineker? Is it unfair when pensioners get threatened with jail? Has it simply had its day? Let us know. And of course, in the jungle, down under, another rumble in the jungle. Nigel lives to fight again another day. Frankie Dettori, the first faller in the race to be the king of the jungle. And we're going to show you how you can help Farage to become the king of the jungle. Your country needs you. That's all coming up in the next hour. Love the Christmas tree, by the way, no expense spared on that front. Get in touch on the immigration issue. More rhetoric, or will it actually deliver? We'll be crossing at about 20 minutes or so to the Commons to find out more. Loads coming up in the show, but first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom is that the Home Secretary is expected to announce new measures to bring down legal migration after record high arrivals into the UK last year. It's understood James Cleverly will raise the minimum salary requirement for skilled workers from overseas to around £38,000 a year. That follows the Prime Minister's promise to do what's necessary to bring down net migration after official figures hit a record high of 745,000 last year. Downing Street says the new measures will focus on reducing abuse of the legal migration system. Meanwhile, Downing Street has rejected claims that the government will give Rwanda another £15 million to sign a new immigration treaty. It's understood the Home Secretary is close to finalising the plan after the Supreme Court ruled against it in November. The agreement could see British lawyers sent to Rwanda to advise judges on asylum cases. The Prime Minister has said the BBC should be realistic about how much people can afford amid reports of a planned increase to the television licence fee. It currently stands at £159 a year, but it's thought the corporation wants to hike the charge from £13.25 to £14 a month. That's a 9% increase. The Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser says the planned rise would be very high amid cost of living pressures. GB News understands the broadcaster could be forced to accept a lower increase. Sir Keir Starmer has said a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. Speaking at the Economy Inquiry in London today, Sir Keir pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. It's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. But Sir Keir promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, the president of COP28, the climate summit in Dubai, says he's surprised by reports suggesting that he had denied a key aspect of climate science. Sultan Al Jaber was criticised in November after he said there was no scientific basis for limiting a rise in global temperatures to 1.5%. But speaking at the summit today, he said his comments had been taken out of context in an attempt to undermine the aim of the conference, and he reiterated his full belief in climate science.
And I have repeatedly said in many occasions and in many different platforms that it is the science that have guided the principles of our strategy as COP28 presidency. And I've been very crystal clear about that, and I hope that this time I am clearer in getting this message across.
Now, the Ministry of Defence's plan for new weapons has a budget black hole of £16.9 billion, the National Audit Office said. The MOD's 10-year programme until 2033 was just unaffordable, and the projected deficit is the biggest since 2012. It puts the estimated costs at more than £300 billion against a budget of just over £288 billion. Meanwhile, almost £4 billion is being put into a rail project for the north of England. Ministers are promising to invest £3.9 billion to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route connecting Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. That's after the Prime Minister scrapped the northern leg of HS2 between Manchester and Birmingham earlier on this year. A number of Conservative MPs are calling for a new body to help infected blood victims, with some backbenchers set to join forces with Labour on payouts over the scandal. Thousands of people contracted HIV and hepatitis after being given contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. Reports suggest that ministers are unlikely to shift their positions while the inquiry is ongoing, but Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves confirmed Labour will support any amendment, with a body created to pay out compensation. Weather news, and nearly 30 flood warnings have been issued as the risk of snow subsides across the country. Heavy rain, though, is now expected across large parts of the United Kingdom. It follows a night of sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfall in the north, with nearly 40 schools closed in Cumbria in the Lake District. The yellow alerts for rain are in place across southern England, South East Wales and the Midlands until 6 o'clock tonight. And there's a yellow rain warning also in place for the northeast of England until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. You're with GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly. Now we start with the migrant crisis once again, and the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, is set to announce plans to reduce legal migration. We will bring you that live on GB News, crossing over shortly. But before that, I'm joined by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, it's Groundhog Day once again. Number 10 started the morning saying we need to reduce immigration significantly, and in the short term, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, expected to speak soon. Any idea of what might be on the table?
Yeah, we'll be hearing from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, shortly, in about 20 minutes' time. He'll set out plans here to lift UK as legally, so that the government's concerned by the big increase in net migration. That's numbers of migrants who arrive here, more than those who leave. It was more than 700,000 in the year to the end of December. That's more than 3 times the 219,000 it was back in 2019. So the idea is to try and bring that down. What they're going to do is lift the qualifying salary required to stay here up from around 26,000 a year to £38,000 a year. That's more like a graduate salary. So it's essentially revert back to where this level was back in 2016 before the EU referendum. The idea there being it becomes more of a graduate visa. So if you get a degree, you can command a salary of that starting salary of that level, which means you have a more of a qualified migrant coming here. That's what's happening today, along with measures to control numbers of migrants who can bring in their family members. They're trying to bring down that big number because it's 3 times more than it was at the election, the same election, when the Tories said it would fall. And that hasn't worked, has it?
OK, thank you very much for that, Chopper. We'll cross back to you later for some more reaction once we've heard from Mr Cleverly, due, as you say, in about 15-20 minutes' time. Now, earlier in the show, Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson admitted that the Conservatives have failed to control immigration.
Late, Martin, we cannot let this go on. It's unsustainable. The figures are more than alarming. You know, the people in this country are a little bit fed up. We've promised, all governments have promised really, to bring migration down. We've failed. It's increasing pressures on public services, as you know. In my area, Ashfield, you know it very well, Martin, you're from that neck of the woods. You know, try and get a doctor's appointment, try and get your kiddie into school, try and get that dental appointment. It's very, very difficult, and people are getting a little bit angry. They're very grumpy, and they're fed up now with, you know, with the migration figures as they are. They want to see action, and quite rightly so.
Astonishing at the weekend, Keir Starmer flashing his garter to the Red Wall, saying that the Tories have betrayed voters on immigration and Brexit. You might have a few words to say about that.
Well, I mean, another bandwagon for Sir Keir to leap on, as Sir Flip-Flop, as we call him. Look, he's playing politics. There's even a Thatcherite now, I see in the papers this week, is claiming to be a big fan of Margaret Thatcher. I don't think anybody takes him seriously. The thing is, Martin, when I'm out and about in Ashfield, knocking on doors and speaking to real people in the real world, yes, they're a little bit grumpy with us over the migration, but there's no love for Starmer. We're hearing it not just in Ashfield, but all over the country. It's seen as being a little bit slippery. He'll jump on any bandwagon possible. And, you know, when he starts taking the lead on migration, this is a man who wanted open borders, by the way. You know, a big Brexiteer, voted against leaving the European Union on numerous occasions. Nobody takes him seriously.
Good stuff as ever. Well, I'm joined now by former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe. Anne, thanks for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure. It might be a good place to start before we start looking ahead to some detail potentially later on from James Cleverly. This notion that Keir Starmer is channeling his inner Maggie Thatcher. I mean, you served under Mrs Thatcher. What on earth do you think is going on with Keir Starmer when he says things like this?
Well, Starmer has no inner Thatcher, I can tell you that right now. Thatcher was made of absolute steel. She was called the Iron Lady, and for a good reason, which was that she had an agenda and she pursued it. And she pursued it through all difficulties and against all opposition, some of it from within her own party. Now, Starmer is the exact opposite. Starmer will announce the policy and 5 minutes later he'll go into complete reverse. And if you look at some of the things he said about Thatcher in the past, they haven't suggested, and certainly don't suggest to me, that he is particularly keen to follow her example. So what's this about? It's about trying to appeal to Tories, but it's so nakedly transparent that no Tory is going to be appealed to by that.
OK, Anne, and looking ahead to shortly, we're going to be crossing to the Commons. James Cleverly expected to put some flesh on the bones about controlling immigration, salary caps, bringing down numbers, dependent caps. The big question, Anne, is have we heard all of this before? Is this yet more rhetoric at the 11th hour? Do you think it's too little too late to save the Conservatives?
We've heard it all before. And if this is what they wanted to do, they've had at least 4 years in which to do it. Some would argue that they've had 13, but they've certainly had, since Boris Johnson claimed to have delivered Brexit, they've had 4 years in which they could have done any of these things. This is pre-election panic. That is what it is. And I can see some of it collapsing in the first 5 minutes. I mean, graduate salaries are all very well. What about care workers, of which we have a massive shortage? And so what I will be expecting to hear, well, actually I won't be expecting it, I will be hoping to hear, but not necessarily expecting, is what are the measures that he's also going to take alongside the measures he's announcing to skill our own workforce so that we don't need to rely on foreign labour. I can see it all falling apart in very short order.
And Anne, we heard earlier about in France there was a terror attack at the Eiffel Tower on Saturday, but we learned that a terrorist from a previous attack has been deported. The ECHR weren't consulted by the French. No lawyers got in the way. They simply got rid of somebody they saw as a threat to their nation. The big question is, if the French can do it, why on earth can't the British?
Well, we should have done. The very first time that an ECHR judge said that we couldn't do the Rwanda deportations, for example, we should have just gone ahead because those judgments from ECHR are merely advisory. Of course, we've now got, as a result of all the dithering and delay, we've now got a judgment from our own courts, which is not advisory. I mean, that judgment we do have to follow. So it looks as if the government is trying to concoct a plan which would make Rwanda, its Rwanda plan, compatible with what the Supreme Court asks. I foresee, without any great difficulty, a whole load of legal challenges ahead. This will not be implemented before the next election.
As we've been talking about Maggie Thatcher, as Starmer is trying to concoct his inner Thatcher, as we're about to learn what the Tories plan to do, I'll ask you this simple question. What do you think Maggie Thatcher would have done about the small boats crisis? What would Maggie Thatcher have done about the huge number of legal visas coming in through the front door?
Well, with the legal visas, that's easily enough. She would have changed the terms, which is now what the government is planning to do. She would also, I think, have clamped down on the number of dependents. And I would hope, and I haven't heard this trailed at all, but I would hope that he's going to look at student visas and at the worthwhileness of the courses which students come over here to study. They should only be coming over here to study very, very serious subjects, medicine, engineering, serious subjects, so that they can then take the skills back to their own country, not Mickey Mouse stuff. But as far as the boats go, I think Mrs. Thatcher would have said, right, well, the instant you put foot on our shores, you will be detained in secure accommodation, you will be assessed quickly, and you will be sent back if you don't meet the criteria, instead of which we lay on hotels. Some of them really rather fancy hotels.
Yeah. There's a feeling of rolling out the red carpet. Another thing that I think really is sticking in the craw of Conservative voters especially are the huge number of dependents and that we see coming over. 96,000 dependents for student visas. In what planet is it a good idea to allow 96,000 children, wives, husbands, whomever, to come to Britain on the tailgate of students studying here? Surely the answer is just to clamp down on those dependent visas altogether.
Well, I think one has to be reasonable about this. I mean, if a student is over here for some years, it is probably unreasonable to say, well, he can't have his wife with him. And very often, and I've seen this happen, the wife, or some cases it might be the husband and the wife be the student, the other partner actually takes a job and works, which means that we get the taxes and we get the national insurance payments. But when, of course, they bring over children, and particularly if they bring over a large number of children, then what happens is that instead of we getting the taxes and the insurance, we're shelling out the education, we're shelling out the health services, and it puts a very different complexion on it. So I think we've got to go fairly carefully with this one. Do it, but do it and make it horses for courses, not a blanket decision either way.
Do you think this issue is now enveloping the Conservatives so much, that of immigration, that in a way Keir Starmer is able to constantly dodge the bullet and not give any ideas or any details of his own? There's almost a sense that they can just let the Conservatives sink as they've hit the iceberg of immigration. Or do you think, as Lee Anderson said earlier on, come the general election, the Labour Party will need to give us some proper detail to see what the difference is between the two parties?
Well, certainly Labour's going to have to produce a manifesto. So it's going to have to give some clear evidence as to what direction it's taking. It will have to. If it's to campaign, it can't go campaigning on a we don't know what we're going to do ticket. What it can do is to do what Blair very, very cleverly did, which was refuse to give any economic promises other than that he would keep the tax and spend programmes intact for a couple of years, until, as he put it, he had had a chance to really examine the books. And I think Keir Starmer is likely to say, come the election, well, we hope to do this, but we need to look at the books. Or we hope to do this, but we need to look at the legal position. There's always going to be a qualification there. And believe me, on the performance at the moment, if he comes out with a policy and that policy creates a backlash, he'll reverse it. The very next day, he'll reverse it.
And there was news out this morning that 52 and rising Conservative MPs don't even plan to stand at the next general election, the second highest number of those jumping ship since 1997, since the Blair wipeout. With that in mind, and also the fact immigration seems to be such a huge issue, do you think immigration will be the issue that sinks Sunak?
Oh, I think immigration is probably already sunken because there's nothing he can do in the time that's left, and he hasn't shown any real will to tackle it and to really get to grips with it. So, I mean, he's only just the only thing he really has produced that's different is the Rwanda plan, and that, as we know, so far at any rate, has gone absolutely nowhere. So I think he's already sunk, and I'm not surprised that Conservatives are jumping ship. They can see the polls, they know what's going to happen. Why not make preparations to earn a living rather than stand and find that on the night suddenly you haven't got a seat?
And Anne, there's lots of rumbles from the jungle. Of course, Nigel is down under and Rishi is talking about we're a broad church, don't rule anything out. They seem to be keeping the cat flap open for a Farage return. Is that something you think is an option, and is it something that may woo the electorate? Is that the answer to the Tories' woes?
Well, I'm afraid I really don't think it's at all likely that Nigel Farage will be leading the Conservatives into the next election, but he'll certainly be extremely active in reform and in getting the message out on immigration, on low taxes, on law and order. And I think most Conservatives will say, oh dear, I do wish he was leading us.
OK, Anne Widdecombe, always a pleasure, never a chore having you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on GB News. It's just always great to talk to Anne. Don't forget, she served under Thatcher for many years. She knows what would have been done these days, and I think a lot of people out there who vote Conservative, who watch shows like this, just think, you know, why can't we have a bit of that kind of spirit coming back? And it's OK for Starmer to channel his inner Maggie, but really, what are his ideas? I think we're just waiting to see, aren't we? We'll have lots more on that story at 5 o'clock, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much, all of you, for making that happen. Now, Rishi Sunak could block a 9% increase in the cost of the BBC licence fee. That's coming up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:25. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, in a few minutes, we'll bring you James Cleverly's big speech on immigration live from the Commons and find out how you can help Nigel Farage be crowned the King of the Jungle Down Under. Now to the controversy over the BBC licence fee, and Rishi Sunak could block a 9% increase in the cost of that licence fee. At the moment, it's 159 quid a year, but it had been due to go up in line with inflation next April to push it up to about £174. Well, I'm joined now by Rebecca Ryan, who's the campaign director at Defund the BBC. Good afternoon to you, Rebecca. Always a pleasure to see you. How are you keeping? Now, obviously the clue of where you stand on this is in your name, Defund the BBC. So tell us why tinkering with the fee or capping the fee, in your opinion, isn't the right approach.
Well, absolutely. What the BBC are trying to do here is just plug the gaps on, you know, where people are. We're seeing that almost 500,000 people each year, or households a year, should I say, cancelling their licence fee, saying, you know what, I don't need to pay for this anymore, being so outraged by the lack of representation by the BBC, by this sort of woke pushing that they, you know, managed to shoehorn into every drama, every storyline, everything. And people are cancelling their licence fees in droves, and basically the BBC sort of saying, rather than making any cutbacks, rather than listening in any seriousness to what the British people are saying, they're just going to crank up the licence fee as high as they possibly can. And it's just an outrage, really. And the BBC needs to sort of get with the digital age and realise that, you know, the licence fees days are numbered. They're going to have to find other ways of funding themselves.
Now, Rebecca, a lot of people would say, well, it's only 50p a day for a licence fee. People pay for Sky News, they pay for satellite TV, they pay for Netflix, they pay for many subscription models. So at 50p a day, the BBC represents good value for money. What do you say to that?
I mean, I think it represents good value for money if you agree with what the BBC is saying. You know, if you're a middle-class person living in Islington, probably is great value for money for you. But for the average person living outside of the M25 in the UK, it isn't great value for money because they're literally, you know, shoehorning this sort of a metropolitan kind of ideology down people's throats. And that's why people, you know, we had the Ofcom report out only last week that showed, even from Ofcom, that they were admitting, you know, working class people do not feel represented by the BBC. Because, you know, what they're doing, the BBC is desperately trying to reach out to this youth audience, and they're coming up with all this sort of woke ideology and shoehorning it into everything. But actually, young people just don't watch live broadcast TV anymore. They watch, you know, YouTube, they watch, you know, their content in all sorts of different other places that you don't need a TV licence for. And so the people who are paying for the BBC, which are people generally sort of over 50, are stuck with this kind of content that doesn't represent them in any way, and it's really an injustice.
And Rebecca, also in that Ofcom report, was interesting to note something that sticks in people's craw is the massive salaries that BBC presenters get paid, and of course, in particular, Saint Lineker. How much of that is an issue from what you hear on the ground?
Oh, massively. I mean, every time Gary Lineker makes a woke tweet on the new X platform, as it's now called, we get massively inundated with new supporters. You know, his behaviour, is great for defund the BBC, and then people come to us and they realise that actually they don't have to keep paying his enormous salary and listen to his, opinions on all sorts of things left, right, and centre.
Great stuff. Rebecca Ryan, who's the campaign director at Defund the BBC. Thanks for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure. And of course, don't forget, everyone complains that the BBC is politically biased. Corbynistas did. So did Boris Johnson voters. Everyone seems to complain about it. But nevertheless, a lot of people seem to be voting with their wallets. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, my colleague Nigel Farage is, of course, currently starring in I'm a Celebrity. And the king of Brexit wants to become the king of jungle. And he's got this special message for you.
I'm asking you to vote Remain. No, seriously, vote for me to remain in the jungle. Now, the easiest way to do it is to get the I'm a Celebrity app. That gives you 5 free votes. Or you can phone or text.
Now, if you want to register to vote for Farage, you'll need to grab your phone and scan that QR code that's on your screen right there now and download the ITV I'm a Celebrity app. As Nigel just said, you can vote for him 5 times per day and the first 5 votes are free. So come on, if you want to keep Nigel in the jungle, get clicking. Your country needs you. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Remember, we'll bring you James Cleverly's big speech on immigration live shortly. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you. The headlines this hour. Sir Keir Starmer says a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. Speaking at the Economy Inquiry in London earlier on today, Sir Keir pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. That's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. But Sir Keir Starmer promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
Well, as we've been saying all afternoon, we are expecting the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, to stand up in the House of Commons and talk about legal migration. Let's take you live now to the Commons, where we believe the Home Secretary is standing up and ready to talk.
Just 3 weeks ago, I have been determined to crack down on those who try and jump the queue and exploit our immigration system. I've been working closely with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, on this subject. The recent figures from the ONS show a provisional estimate of net migration for the year ending June 2023 of 672,000. Whilst this is lower than the ONS estimate for net migration for the year ending December 2022, it is still far too high. When our country voted to leave the European Union, we also voted to take back control of our borders. And thanks to this Conservative government, we now have a points-based immigration system through which we can control who comes to the UK. We prioritise the skills and talent that we need to grow our economy and to support our NHS, and we have a competitive visa system for globally mobile talent. For example, last year, we expanded our health worker visa access to address the urgent need for more social care workers. The whole country can also be proud that in the last decade, we have welcomed more than 500,000 people through humanitarian routes. People from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, from Afghanistan, including 85,000 from Ukraine and Hong Kong in the last year alone. The British people will always do the right thing by those in need. But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried about housing, about GP appointments, about school places, and access to other public services when they can see their communities growing and growing quickly in numbers. From January 2024, the right for international students to bring dependents will be removed unless they are on postgraduate courses designated as a research programme. We always want to attract the global brightest and best. We have also stopped international students from switching out of the student route into work routes before their studies have been completed. These changes will have a tangible impact on net migration. Madam Deputy Speaker, around 153,000 visas were granted to dependents of sponsored students in the year ending September 2023. Today, I can announce that we will go even further than those provisions already in place, with a 5-point plan to further curb immigration abuses, and that will deliver the biggest ever reduction in net migration. In total, this package, plus our reduction in student dependence, will mean around 300,000 fewer people will come in future years than have come to the UK last year. These measures are possible because we are building up our domestic workforce and supporting British workers. Thanks to the excellent work of my right honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, our Back to Work plan will help people stay healthy, get off benefits and move into sustainable employment. It builds on the ambitious £7 billion employment package from the spring budget to help up to 1.1 million people with long-term health conditions, disabilities, or who have been on long-term unemployment to look for work, to get into work and to stay in work. We're also investing heavily in helping adults learn valuable skills and prepare for the economy of the future. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have world-class universities that help in that endeavour. So of a 5-point plan, the first of our 5 points will be to end the abuse of the health and care visa. We will stop overseas care workers from bringing family dependents, and we will require care firms in England to be regulated by the Care Quality Commission in order for them to sponsor visas. Approximately 120,000 dependents accompanied 100,000 care workers and senior care workers in the year ending September 2023. Only 25% of dependents are estimated to be in work, meaning a significant number are drawing on public services rather than helping to grow the economy. We recognise that foreign workers do great work in our NHS and health sector, but it is also important that migrants make a big enough financial contribution. Therefore, we will increase annual immigration health surcharge this year by 66%, from £624 to £1,035, to raise on average around £1.3 billion for the health services of this country every year. Second, we will stop immigration undercutting the salary of British workers. We will increase the skilled worker earnings threshold by a third to £38,700 from next spring, in line with the median full-term wage for those kinds of jobs. Those coming on health and social care visa routes will be exempt, so we can continue to bring in the healthcare workers on which our care sector and NHS rely. Thirdly, we will scrap cut-price shortage labour from overseas by ending the 20% going rate salary discount for shortage occupations and reforming the shortage occupation list. I have asked the Migration Advisory Committee to review the occupations on this list because of our new higher skilled worker salary thresholds, and we will create a new immigration salary list with a reduced number of occupations in coordination with the MAC. Fourthly, we will ensure people only bring dependents who they can support financially. by raising the minimum income for family visas to the same threshold as the minimum salary threshold for skills workers, which is 38,700. The minimum income requirement of 18,600 has not been increased since 2012. Madam Deputy Speaker, this package of measures will take place from next spring. Finally, having already banned overseas master's students from bringing family members to the UK, I have asked the Migration Advisory Committee to review the graduate route to prevent abuse, to protect the integrity and quality of the UK's outstanding higher education sector. It needs to work in the best interests of the UK, supporting the pathway into high-quality jobs for the global talent pool, but reducing opportunities for abuse. Madam Deputy Speaker, this package of measures, taken in addition with the measures on student dependence that we have already announced in May, means that around 300,000 fewer people will be eligible to come to the UK than were coming last year. This is the largest reduction on record. Immigration policy must be fair, consistent, legal, and sustainable. That is why we are also taking the fight to illegal migration. Our plan to stop the boats is working. Small boat arrivals are down by a third, even as illegal migration across the rest of Europe is on the rise. Madam Deputy Speaker, today we have taken decisive action to reduce legal migration with our 5-point plan. Enough is enough. We are curbing abuses to the healthcare visa. We are increasing thresholds, cutting the SOL discount, increasing family income requirements, and cutting the number of student dependents. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. Today's statement is an admission of years of total failure by this Conservative government, failure on the immigration system and failure on the economy. It is another example of the total chaos at the heart of this government. Net migration has trebled since the last election, since the Conservatives promised to reduce it, and trebled as a result of their policies on the economy and on immigration, including the Prime Minister's policy decisions. In a chaotic panic, the Prime Minister now opposes the policies that he introduced and thinks that their own decisions are a problem. But who does the Home Secretary think has been in charge for the last 13 years? More chaos, more veering all over the place. Net migration should come down. Labour has called for an end to the 20% unfair discount, for increased for salary thresholds to prevent. We have called for an end to the 20% unfair discount, also for increased salary thresholds to prevent exploitation and include advice from a strengthened Migration Advisory Committee, and most of all, we've called for a proper plan with clear links between the immigration system and training and the economy, workforce plans, none of which are included in the statement today because they have no grip, no proper plan. This is a chaotic approach. Immigration is important for Britain, and rightly we have helped Ukraine and Hong Kong. We benefit from international talent and students. But that is why the immigration system needs to be controlled and managed so that it is fair and effective, and also why net migration should come down from these record levels. But there needs to be a proper plan. It was this Conservative government who brought in the 20% wage discount that allowed employers to recruit at less than the going rate, even though the Migration Advisory Committee warned against it, even though it is completely unfair. They chose to apply salary thresholds, again lower than the Migration Advisory Committee originally proposed, and not to update them for years. And as Chancellor, And then, as Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Richmond repeatedly blocked proposals to tighten the rules, including in May this year, and including when they refused Labour's calls to end the unfair 20% discount. And they repeatedly failed to listen to warnings about the failure to train or pay properly here in the UK. 12 months ago, I warned that work visas had substantially increased as a result of major skills shortages in the UK, and the Conservatives were not taking any serious action to address those skills shortages. The Leader of the Opposition 12 months ago warned the immigration system should be linked to new requirements to train up workers here at home. But the Conservatives did nothing, and unbelievably they are still doing nothing. Nothing in this statement about training requirements or workforce plans. They say they want fewer shortage occupations, but it was only 4 months ago that they added bricklayers, roof tilers, plasterers to the shortage list because they have totally failed on construction training here at home. There's no plans to tackle that. Engineering apprenticeships have halved since 2018. Well, no wonder engineering visas have gone up. Again, nothing to tackle those failures. And social care visas have gone up from 3,500 a year to over 100,000 a year because they have failed for years to heed warnings about recruitment and retention in social care, and they halved the budget for social care workforce recruitment and support back in the spring, and they are still not listening, still refusing to adopt Labour's plan for a proper workforce strategy for social care, including professional standards and a fair pay agreement. They're failing to tackle the delays in the asylum system that have also pushed the net migration figures up, failing to tackle NHS waiting lists that are preventing the long-term sick going back to work. And the Prime Minister is just crashing around all over the place, reversing policies that he introduced, criticising policies he defended 6 months ago, and introducing new immigration policies without any of the economic policies to match. The previous Prime Minister was accused of being a shopping trolley, veering around from one side to the other. The current Prime Minister is clearly veering, but he certainly isn't steering. He's just climbed into someone else's shopping trolley, and he's being pushed around all over the place. So can the Home Secretary tell us where is the workforce plan on social care, on engineering, on bricklaying, on all the shortage occupations that their total economic failure has left us with? Has the Migration Advisory Committee advised on these policies, and where's the reforms to strengthen the committee so that they can do so? And why are they still not introducing our requirements on employers or on the government to address the skills and labour shortages that are driving the increase in the net migration in the first place? The Conservatives are in chaos. They've got no serious plan for the economy, no serious plan for the immigration system, no serious plan for the country. Britain deserves better than this.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was waiting.
Okay, there we have it. So Home Secretary James Cleverly delivering a speech in Commons, which he said is the most significant and boldest, the biggest ever reduction in net migration figures, promising 300,000 less next year than we had this year. Of course, record figures, 745,000 last year. James Cleverly's talking again. Let's cross back to James.
Set about repairing through our entire time in government. Hers was the party that in government failed to put transitional measures in place when the EU expanded, importing significant numbers of people in the construction industry, which meant there was a disincentive for investing in people and technology and productivity, a situation which she now decries. She fails to make reference to the £7 billion employment package that was announced in the spring budget that will help 1.1 million people get back into work and stay in work. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I was at the dispatch box in the days after my appointment, I said that Labour had a plan for migration. The problem that they have got, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the plan that they are proposing is the plan that I am already implementing. Working with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, since the day I was appointed, we have put forward the most substantial package of legal migration reforms the country has ever seen. And their great idea is already being put in place by this great government.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Okay, there we have it. James Cleverly, Home Secretary, giving a speech, what he called the biggest ever reduction in net migration, promising 300,000 fewer immigrants next year than we had this time around. Of course, record figures 745,000 for last year. He gave us a 5-point plan saying enough is enough. The first point, end abuse of healthcare visas, no dependents in future. Second point, we will stop immigration undercutting British workers. That's a salary cap, £38,700. And the third point, scrap the cut price labour dividend. That is, of course, visas coming in can be paid 20% less, foreign workers 20% less than British workers. Fourth point, only bring dependents for those who work. And he was implying the same salary. So you can bring a dependent, but they must be working and contributing in Britain. The same salary, £38,700. And finally, point 5, to review the graduate route, reducing opportunities for the abuse of student visas. Well, let's get some reaction now to James Cleverly's plans to reduce legal migration. Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Steve Reed, joins me on the show. Thanks for joining us, Steve. Always a pleasure. A bold plan, an ambitious plan, a 5-point plan. Enough is enough. Shot down in flames by Yvette Cooper. What's your take on it?
Well, good afternoon, and it's good to be here with you. I mean, the thing is, how many times have we heard a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries stand up in the chamber of the House of Commons and tell us how much they're going to decrease migration by, only to see it soar in the following few months? Now, the figure that James Cleverly is talking about there, even if he manages to cut it by the amount that he's just said, and I doubt that, given their track record, even then, migration would be around double the level that it was in December 2019 when they told us they were going to cut it. So if a promise to cut it results in doubling it, how on earth can the government claim that that is a success? How on earth can they? The truth is, they said they would get a grip on migration, legal and illegal migration. We've got record numbers coming into the country, and we've still got near record numbers of people coming across the country illegally, stemmed for the time being only by the change in weather. But given that they put nothing in place, we're still paying £8 million every single day to keep unprocessed asylum seekers in hotels at the taxpayers' expense. How on earth can we believe a word they say?
Well, Steve, Yvette Cooper was quick to point out that Labour would actually quite like a few of the Conservative Party's policies, in particular the scrapping the 20% levy. Well, that's good to hear, because I've always felt, and a lot of people have too, that it's simply unfair to employ people who cheaper than British workers. But it won't be enough, will it, Steve? And you must concur, it won't be enough just to simply have a pop at the Tories continually. I think what the voters would like to see, particularly in the Red Wall and the areas where immigration is a huge idea, is what is the Labour Party's solution? It's not enough just to keep having a dig at the Tories. What would you guys do?
No, spot on. And I'm glad, in all of what's gone on, I'm very glad James Cleverly has picked up our proposal, which is that you need to scrap that 20% wage discount to bring a foreign worker in to do a job a British worker could have been doing. It was mad they ever put that in place. Now, I mean, one of the reasons that we've got these so-called skills shortages is the government has not properly managed our own economy. If they were identifying, as they have been, areas where we have skills shortages, then surely instead of offering for all this time discounts to employers to bring in somebody from abroad, they could have used that to train somebody up so they have the skills, a British person already resident here, to do that job and fill that vacancy. That would have been a better use of the money. There would be no question then of somebody wanting to bring in family members because their family members already live here. No question of finding them somewhere to live because they already live somewhere. It would have dealt with it all so much more simply. So I think our plan, which is to devolve power over skills training to local areas where they know far better what their economy needs than people sitting behind me here in Whitehall. They know what their own economy needs best. That is the way to take those decisions and equip British people to do the jobs in their own area without requiring them to move around.
OK, Steve, while I've got you here, did you choke on your cornflakes at the weekend when Keir Starmer seemed to channel his inner Maggie Thatcher in the Telegraph, of all places?
I get your point. My dad was one of the people that lost their job when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. But of course, what Keir was saying is he was pointing to Margaret Thatcher as one of those prime ministers that made a sea change in British politics. And love her or loathe her, she certainly represented a sea change in how we do politics. That's the point he's making. Those prime ministers don't come all the time. They're few and far between. Keir was saying that he's outlining a different way of governing the country, a mission-led government, not the chop and change that we keep getting every time we get under this lot, a new prime minister every few months. And, people like Grant Shapps, 5 different cabinet jobs in 12 months. Too much chop and change. We need consistency. We need direction. But Keir was very clear. His mission will be to grow the economy because that's how we give British people, British workers, the pay rise that they deserve after 10 years of wage restraint.
OK, Steve Reid, Shadow Secretary for State for Environment and Food and Rural Affairs. Thanks for joining me on GB News. Always a pleasure. Thanks. OK, I'm joined now by my political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, lots and lots of detail to take in there, but to be fair to James Cleverly, a detailed 5-point plan. He called it the biggest ever reduction in net migration we've seen in Britain, saying enough is enough. Can you talk us through some of the detail?
Well, it's a 5-point plan where users aren't we in government now. They want to stop care workers bringing in family dependents. They want to increase the skilled worker earning threshold by a third from around 26,000 a year to 38,000 a year, basically meaning that only graduates can come here on a skilled visa. They want to scrap this cut price shortage labour scheme by reforming the occupation list. This allows you, if you're on to bring in people on 20% below this minimum threshold, to bring in people to fill gaps in the market. They want to lift the minimum threshold for family visas from around 18,000 to the same level as the new graduate visa, if you like, £38,000 a year, and also look at the review of the graduate route to prevent abuses. Take a step back. What they're saying here is they're going to cut net migration by 300,000 a year. Now, that means there's a new number out there in acceptable net migration to this country. If you take the 12 months to the end of December last year, it's 745,000. Take off 300,000, that's 445,000 a year, which is more than twice the number when the Tories came to power in 2019. Even if you take the figure in the 12 months to June last year, 670,000, that's still 370,000 a year. That's well in excess of the 219,000 when the Tories came to power. Essentially, the government here is surrendering on net migration, accepting that figure must be many hundreds of thousands a year, nowhere near the tens of thousands a year pledged by the government back in 2010. Many people might think it is still too high, and this is not enough. We're waiting to see how Tories will react to it. But you heard that from Steve Reid saying they've taken some Labour ideas here, but some Tories might think, why can't we get back to a figure? Why can't we deliver on that manifesto pledge back in 2019? That was below 219,000 a year. This is nowhere near that number.
OK, Chris Hope, thanks for that update. Excellent as ever. And let's get the thoughts now of former Conservative MP Neil Parish, who's been waiting patiently to join us. Thanks for joining us, Neil. So there's some clarity at last. There's a 5-point plan. Enough is enough was the rallying cry from Mr Cleverly, a 300,000 cut. But the question is, will it be enough to satiate Tory voters? Have they heard it all before? And is it too little too late?
Yeah, I think the trouble they've got is that they want the economy to grow, and of course very much they need quite a lot of immigrant labour, and that's been their problem. And where I do actually agree with Labour is the government has done not enough in training up our own workers to take these jobs. I mean, you take the social care, I mean, a huge number of jobs there needed, and we haven't necessarily got our own people trained up to do it. So yes, I mean, it's one of these things where people want to see net migration come down. But of course, we also, like I said, want to grow the economy too. I think when it comes to dependents coming in, all of these things, that is a very good thing to do. I think that scrapping the 20% where, which was less wages that they were being paid, the immigrant labour coming in, then I think that is also right. But it's going to be interesting to see that as the government tries to cut the number of people coming in for jobs, will the building trade, all of those others, and social care, will they actually have enough labour going forward? Because we really got to get to training schemes going and very fast. So I think it's a little bit too late for a lot of this. But I mean, let's see if it works. Some of it will work, some of it won't. But for goodness sake, train up our own workers much faster if we're going to supplement them for people coming into work.
I think we'd all agree with that. And isn't it astonishing, Neil, that the fact that James Cleverly can slash off 300,000 and yet we're still left with almost 500,000? That's where we're at. It's this problem now is so big. Losing 300,000, as admirable as that may appear, still leaves a huge number. So I ask you again, will this be enough to satiate Tory voters, or is it just end of times?
I think it probably won't be enough, but I don't think, in fairness, Labour Party policy in the end will be much different because, surprisingly enough, we probably actually need quite a number of workers coming in to fulfil an economy. And don't forget, Labour is going to concentrate on growth. So some of the growth will come from our own workers. Some of the growth will come from those imported ones. So, it is, and I'm out of Parliament now. I'm not I've not got the Conservative whip, so I can be very open with this. So I think it is, I think the trouble is that the Conservative government, and I suspect Labour will do the same, they will set a target that they will never hit. And then, of course, everybody gets completely fed up and a plague on all your houses. And that's what's happening at the moment. And I can say that because, like I said, I'm not sitting with the party whip anymore. But, I've got some sympathy for the government, but they do need to do much more training. And they have, since Brexit, we, agricultural workers, all of these people, we just haven't got enough, and we haven't trained up enough of our own. So, they've got to get their finger out, and they haven't got much time to do it, have they? So I shall be very blunt with you this evening. So thank you for the interview.
And thank you for being so frank and forthright, and thank you for waiting patiently there. Former Conservative MP Neil Parish, thanks for joining us on the show. It's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts. Now, we've rolled over the end of the hour, but first, let's go to your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you. In the top story this hour, the Home Secretary, as you've just been hearing, has announced new rules that he says will give the biggest ever reduction in net migration. Under the plans aimed at bringing down legal migration, James Cleverly told the House of Commons 300,000 fewer people will be able to come to the UK every year. Among the measures, the minimum salary required for a skilled worker visa will rise from £26,000 to £38,700 from next spring. And James Cleverly also told MPs overseas workers and students will be stopped from bringing family dependents along to the UK with them. He says it's the best way forward for taxpayers.
People will always do the right thing by those in need. But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried about housing, about GP appointments, about school places, and access to other public services when they can see their communities growing and growing quickly in numbers.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has said a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. He was speaking at the Economy Inquiry in London. He pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. That's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. But Sir Keir promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth.
If we are privileged enough to be elected next year, the quack diagnosis, the search for distractions and excuses, all of that ends. Because the defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, the president of the COP28 climate summit that's taking place in Dubai right now says he's surprised by reports suggesting that he denied a key aspect of climate science. Sultan Al Jaber was criticised in November after he'd said there was no scientific basis for limiting a rise in global temperatures to 1.5%. But speaking at the summit today, he said his comments had been taken out of context in an attempt to undermine the aim of the conference. He reiterated his full belief in climate science.
And I have repeatedly said in many occasions and in many different platforms that it is the science that have guided the principles of our strategy as COP28 presidency. And I've been very crystal clear about that, and I hope that this time I am clearer in getting this message across.
Sultan Al Jaber. Now, the Ministry of Defence's plan for new weapons has a budget black hole of £16.9 billion. The National Audit Office has said the MOD's 10-year programme until 2033 was just unaffordable, and the projected deficit is the biggest since 2012. It puts the estimated cost at more than £300 billion against a budget of just over £288 billion. Meanwhile, almost £4 billion is being put into a rail project for the north of England. Ministers are promising to invest £3.9 billion to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route connecting Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. That's after the Prime Minister scrapped the northern leg of HS2 between Manchester and Birmingham earlier on this year. A number of Conservative MPs are calling for a new body to help infected blood victims, with some backbenchers set to join forces with Labour on the payout scandal. Thousands of people contracted HIV and hepatitis after being contaminated with blood products in the 1970s and the 1980s. Reports suggest that ministers are unlikely to shift their positions while the inquiry is ongoing. But Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves confirmed Labour will support an amendment with a body created to pay out compensation if they're elected. Weather news, and nearly 30 flood warnings have been issued, and there's a risk of snow as well. Heavy rain is expected across large parts of the UK, although not quite as much snow as there has been so far. It follows a night of sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfall in the north. Nearly 40 schools closed today in Cumbria in the Lake District as a result. Well, the yellow weather warnings are for rain, and they're in place across southern England, southeastern Wales and the Midlands until 6 o'clock tonight. Just less than an hour to go, and a yellow rain warning also in place for northeast England. That is until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Take your umbrella if you're going outside. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you very much, Polly. Now, we start with the migrant crisis. And the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has been setting out his plans to bring down net migration. Addressing the Commons, Mr Cleverly said that whilst Britain would always help those in need of asylum, the British people rightly expect legal migration to be controlled.
British people will always do the right thing by those in need. But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried about housing, about GP appointments, about school places, and access to other public services when they can see their communities growing and growing quickly in numbers.
Well, I'm joined now by political editor Christopher Hope for reaction to this. Chris, thanks for joining us again. Mr. Cleverly called it the biggest ever reduction in net migration, crying enough is enough, and he set out a 5-point plan. The big question is, Chris, will that 5-point plan be enough to satiate Tory voters?
Yeah, Martin, I've been busy on my calculator to work out what is the new acceptable level of net migration to this country. Don't forget, when this government was elected back in 2019, the manifesto said they would cut net migration. That's people who arrive here through the gates in Heathrow or Borders on the south coast. No problem, in you come, and you're allowed to settle here legally. Now, the figure then was 219,000. That was the figure, the net figure. So that was the number more than those who left, 219,000. The figure for the 12 months to December last year was 745,000, more than 3 times the figure back in 2019. In the 12 months to June this year, you take out the numbers of Ukrainians who came here last year, it was 672,000. So if you take off 300,000 from that, the new number the government is content with in net migration is either 372,000 or as much as 445,000 a year. That is, well, the top number is twice the figure that came here in 2019. That's a figure which will be pored over, thought about by Tory MPs tonight. Is that enough to tackle net migration, or is it merely scratching the surface? Yes, it's a big fall, 300,000 from the measures announced by James Cleverly, a 5-point plan, notably lifting the basic qualification for a visa by 20% by a third, forgive me, to £38,700, making that visa, working visa, basically a graduate visa for the first time since 2016. Also, similar measures on family visas, stopping care workers bringing in family dependents, and stopping this 20% discount to fill areas of the economy where there's a shortage in labour. Is that enough to deal with this issue? It's a real political issue. It overshadowed what was quite a well-received autumn statement by Jeremy Hunt with those figures out the day after from the Office of National Statistics. We'll wait and see. I'm trying to get reaction on my computer, my phones here from Tory MPs. We'll bring it to you on GB News first, of course. But the new number now is either 370,000 a year is OK. That's a net figure. The government finds that acceptable. Do our viewers think that's true too?
And Chris, I guess in a sense that shows how far this problem is getting out of control. We voted to take back control. Many certainly did on the Conservative side of the party lines. And when you look at these numbers, the fact that we can trim off 300 grand and yet still be at the thick end of 500,000, Chris, is almost absurd.
That's right. If Nigel Farage wasn't without his phone in the jungle, there might be a small eruption from somewhere in North Queensland at the state of this number that's now acceptable. 370,000 a year is the new net figure the government thinks is OK. Many may not agree with that. The problem is on the policy that the Labour haven't got much of a better plan for this. And if we're going to allow that many to come through the border gates each year, where will they all go to work? Where can they find GP surgery support, dentist surgery support, school places? It puts more and more pressure on public services. And that's what we hear daily in the inbox here at GB News. To be fair to James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, he recognises that on the dependent side, numbers arriving here with others on visas, a minority of those are going to work and support the economy. But Jeremy Hunt earlier today was saying he knows there's 6 million people of working age, adults who are not working. There's 1 million vacancies out there in the economy, job vacancies. The question is getting Brits back to work. That's a challenge the government's got. They're cutting off, they're slowing the taps on foreign labour, but not altogether stopping it, because they can't guarantee getting those jobs filled. And that's the economic problem at the heart of this. The Treasury will be worried about this number. They'll worry if it's going too short. We'll wait and see.
Chris, can I ask you more of a philosophical question on this topic? And it's this. Why did it take the Conservatives so long to wake up to the idea that this is something that drives voters bonkers? Here we are, they've slashed off 300,000, yet it's still going to be 372 or 445. Why did it take them so long to wake up?
Martin, that's a great question. That's exactly the question I asked the government in the morning meeting. Why now? Why are you doing this now? They say they've recognised there has been abuse in the system. They want to crack down on it. Of course, the figure for 2022 calendar year was inflated by us UK opening its doors to people fleeing the conflict in Ukraine. And that meant it was a bigger figure. The 745,000 figure was upgraded from a much lower figure of about 606,000, I think. So the big increase there was Ukraine. But looking back, the run rate is now well over 600,000 a year. If you halve that, that's 300,000 a year. That's a long way away from the 219,000, which for many was far too much. David Cameron came to power back in 2010, pledging to get the figure below 100,000 a year. Home Secretary Suella Braverman told me for my podcast that I was doing last year, that in October last year, she wanted to get the figure down to tens of thousands. We're nowhere near that number. I think what's happened is the Treasury has taken over a lot of government policy making. They are happy with a figure around net 250,000 a year, and that's what's driving it. You've got to get the economy growing to increase tax take, to support public services. But is the cost of that more net migration? That's a challenge at the heart of government right now, Martin.
Christopher Hope, thank you for that dexterous mental gymnastics, Chris, pointing out there that even if we take 300,000 off the Tory figures, the official figures, it will either be 372 net thousand per year or 445,000 per year, which is still way off the 2010 manifesto pledge of 219,000. And of course, David Cameron before that said the tens of thousands. Well, I'm joined now by former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker. Norman, you know a thing or two about immigration. It was on your brief. So James Cleverly has called it the biggest ever reduction in net migration today, saying enough is enough. Yvette Cooper responded by saying this is an admission of years of total failure. Net migration has trebled as a direct result of Tory policies. What's your take on today's announcement?
Well, look, I mean, we've got real figures which reflect what's happened in the last year, and we've got theoretical figures from the Home Secretary today as to what might happen in the future. But Chris Hope was absolutely right to draw attention to the fact that the coalition government had a target of under 100,000, and it's been out of control. We've now got a figure 3 times what it was at Brexit, and many people voted for Brexit, as you will know, Martin, on the basis of reducing migration, not increasing it exponentially, as we've seen recently. But there is a trade-off, as Chris rightly says, between the economy and the numbers coming in. The fact is, if the tap was switched off entirely, the NHS and social services in particular, and agriculture to some extent, would simply not be able to function properly.
It certainly makes you think, Norm, when you look at the numbers. I think you're right. I agree with you on this. If we just turned off the tap overnight, great sectors of the economy would shudder almost, not to a halt, but they would be struggling. And that is because, I put it to you, Norman, we have a system where we have become dependent, almost addicted to cheap foreign labour, particularly in the health service and the care worker sector, and to a lesser extent agriculture. And so a lot of Tory voters will be saying, OK, you're slashing 300,000 off, but it's still the thick end of 500,000. Will that be enough for Tory voters, or will it simply, Norman, be too little too late?
Well, I expect the latter. And also, as I said, the 300,000 cuts is a theoretical cut. It hasn't happened yet. And recent announcements from the government saying this will happen and this will happen on migration have simply proved to be wrong. So I don't think people should necessarily believe.
There goes Norman. Isn't it astonishing that Norman, who was in the coalition government, the Clegg-Cameron era, said their annual target was 109,000. That's the stuff of dreams these days, isn't it? The stuff of dreams, and way below what the Tories promised later, and a fraction of where we are now. And even with James Cleverly's 300,000 lopped off the numbers, still either 372,000 or 445,000 per year. This is the legal migration through the front door, through visas, students, skilled workers, care workers, dependents. And despite Cleverly talking very, very tough, I wonder if you people out there think this is going to be enough. The fact that they're happy, the fact they're actually happy, months from a general election, of a figure of the thick end of 500,000 per year, I think, is a state of the nation. That's where we're at. I think we're joined again now by Norman Baker. You back with us, Norm?
I am, Martin, yes, thank you.
Good. So I was just saying to the viewers there, in your absence, the fact that the coalition government had a target of of 109,000. Yet here we are now, a Conservative Home Secretary proposing that a figure of almost 445,000 is a good plan. It shows you how far we've fallen.
It shows how far we've failed to meet targets and how out of control migration has become under this particular government, the successive Conservative government since the coalition founded. And it's I don't know what you caught me saying earlier on, but this is excessive failure from governments over the years to invest properly in proper wages and training for people in the health service and social care. And we've been very happy to use cheap labour. Well, there's a price to be paid for that. And the price is high migration.
OK, former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us on the show. There we have it. Well, the Home Secretary will bring in policies that he says will bring the biggest ever reduction in net migration. Responding to James Cleverly's announcement, his opposite number, Yvette Cooper, says it shows the Tories haven't met their targets.
Today's statement is an admission of years of total failure by this Conservative government, failure on the immigration system and failure on the economy. It is another example of the total chaos at the heart of this government. Net migration has trebled since the last election, since the Conservatives promised to reduce it, and trebled as a result of their policies on the economy and on immigration, including the Prime Minister's policy decisions.
It's hard to disagree with that. I mean, it is hard to disagree that they keep blaming everybody else, Conservatives, but they're the ones who held the front door open, and the fact we can lose 300,000 and still be at almost 500,000 is astonishing. But that's where we are. We get lots more on that story on our website, and thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all the brilliant analysis you've come to expect from GB News, so thanks to all of you for making that happen. Now, there's lots more on James Cleverly's migration announcement between now and 6 p.m. But I'll also bring you some of today's other big stories, including Rishi Sunak could block a 9% increase in the cost of the BBC licence fee. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's almost 5:25. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, a little later this hour, I'll discuss Sir Keir Starmer's controversial comments about Maggie Thatcher. Lots of people on the left are angry that he's praised the former Prime Minister, the Iron Lady. But still, now let's get more reaction to James Cleverly's speech on migration. I'm now joined by GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, more tough talking. Always a pleasure to see you, by the way. More tough talking from James Cleverly, the biggest ever reduction in net migration. Enough is enough, he's crying. The point is, how much is enough? Because he's cutting 300,000 off, but if you do the maths as Chopper did in real time, it's still a net figure of 372,000 or 445,000, depending on how you do the books. So that's still a huge amount. Will this be enough to satisfy Conservative voters, Nigel?
Well, possibly not, on the basis that the only reason you're cutting a record amount of legal migrants coming here is because you have a record amount of legal migrants coming here. So, no, I think people want to see immigration much lower. But, however, we've got to take into account the need for the economy. So I rather agreed with the former First Secretary Damien Green in response to James Cleverly, where he said that of the 5-point plan, he thought 4.5 points of them were pretty good. I think that's right. The 20% cut in bosses being able to employ cheap foreign labour goes. That's a long-standing Labour policy that James Cleverly's adopted. That's good. But the problem, obviously, for social and healthcare workers is that they can't bring dependents. Now, that means we've got to fill the vacancies with single people.
I guess, Nigel, though, one thing it will do, and we're getting to that point now where it's not enough for the Labour Party, Yvette Cooper, Sir Keir Starmer to keep saying, well, the Tories have completely failed on this, which may be true, but we need to see some detail from the Labour Party. What will they plan to do in return? And, OK, you can say that Cleverly's nicked an idea from Labour, but, that hasn't stopped the Labour Party doing that in the past. And the interesting thing will be, Nigel, if the Labour Party are forced to come out and say that they wouldn't do any of this, because the abuse of dependents in particular, and is something that people really, really are concerned about, and particularly in the student visas. So we now need to see what Labour plan to do.
Yes, and I think that probably Labour will largely follow these plans as they stand, as I said, because some of it is Labour policy anyway. I think the most significant point is that you can't now hire cheap foreign labour. Now, we will all pay a cost for that. There'll be a knock-on effect on higher prices. However, it is the one way of reducing the number of people coming here because employers won't be encouraging them. And that will also mean that British workers can get British jobs.
Didn't that used to be a key part of what the Labour Party stood for? The idea that we should pay a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, that's a good thing, isn't it? And when did we get addicted on this doom cycle of foreign cheap imported labour? Surely the Labour Party can also agree that cycle needs to end.
Well, they do. That's exactly what they're saying. And you're right, that the British jobs for British workers was a slogan that Gordon Brown came up with. And the point that the Labour Party is making, and I think rightly, is that you should get equal pay for an equal day's work. So it doesn't matter whether you're from overseas or you're a British worker. But the great bonus of that is it will mean that employers are more likely to hire British workers because they can get them at the same rate.
Well, that sounds like a good thing. Another topic in the news today, Nigel, is the BBC licence fee. Here we go again. It's back in the telescope sights of the government, this time rattling their sabre about blocking a 9% pay rise, licence fee rise, on that. What's your take on that? Should the government be getting involved in this, or is the licence fee actually fair for what you get?
Well, I mean, with the licence fee at the moment is 43p a day, which is quite cheap for all the various services the BBC provide: TV, radio, both national and local, online news, the World Service. If the BBC got a full £15 increase, which is what they want, that would only go up 47p. So it's not a huge amount of money. What I do think that Rishi Sunak is dodging at the moment is the licence fee itself is just outdated. What you need is a new system of funding the BBC, and probably the best way of doing that is some kind of household levy.
And so how would that work? I mean, that's what we already have. The BBC licence fee is a de facto household levy. You don't get a choice if you pay it or not. In fact, if you don't want to pay it, you can end up in jail or prosecuted. I've been inundated with stories of that today when I put it out on social media. So how would this household levy work, Nigel?
For starters, it would become an opt-out system rather than opt-in, which makes it easier to collect and enforce. It would work in a similar way to the way that we pay council tax. But what would happen is that you would pay different levels of license fee depending on the value of your house. So obviously, the bigger the house, the more likely you are to have more than one television, and those people would end up paying more. Now, if you actually added it to council tax and you collected it that way, what it would mean is that people would automatically be opted in, and anybody who didn't want to watch the BBC could then opt out and not pay the fee. And of course, you could enforce that much more easily because you could check that those people are opting out legitimately.
But surely everybody would just opt out.
Well, I mean, if they did opt out, then they can't watch the BBC. There's a situation we've got at the moment that the BBC have lost 400,000 license payers a year, and that's because people are using different services and not having anything to do with the BBC. So it would be your choice. You could then decide, do you want to watch the BBC or don't you?
OK, Nigel Nelson, always a pleasure to talk to you. GB News' senior political commentator, thank you very much. I think if there was an opt-out clause, simply everybody in Britain with half a brain would opt out. Anyway, there's lots more still to come now between now and 6 o'clock. Find out how Nigel Farage is getting on in I'm a Celebrity. And I'll tell you how you can help make Nigel become the king of the jungle. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you. Well, the top stories this hour. The Home Secretary has, within the last hour, announced new rules that he says will give the biggest ever reduction in net migration into the UK. Under the plans aimed at bringing down legal migration, James cleverly said 300,000 fewer people will be able to come to the UK each year. Among the measures, overseas workers and students will be stopped from bringing their family and dependents with them. Mr Cleverly said it's the best way forward for British taxpayers.
People will always do the right thing by those in need. But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried about housing, about GP appointments, about school places and access to other public services when they can see their communities growing and growing quickly in numbers.
Also the news today, Sir Keir Starmer says a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. He was speaking in London earlier on today, and he pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. That's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate over the last 15 years. He promised Labour would be obsessed with economic growth. And nearly 30 flood warnings have been issued as the risk of snow subsides across the UK. Heavy rain is now expected across large parts of the country. It follows a night of sub-zero temperatures and heavy snowfall in the north. Nearly 40 schools closed today in Cumbria and the Lake District. Well, those yellow rain alerts are in place across southern England, and a yellow rain warning is now in place for the northeast of England until tomorrow morning. Those are the latest news headlines. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
A quick snapshot of today's markets, and the pound buying you $1.2631 and €1.1666. The price of gold, £1,605.56 an ounce, and the FTSE 100 has closed the day for today at 7,512 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now let's get more reactions to James Cleverly's speech on migration. I'm joined now by John McTernan, who is Tony Blair's former political secretary. John, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure. So the very fact, John, that James Cleverly has vowed the biggest ever reduction in net migration, 300,000 off, yet whichever way you do the books, it's either that means 372,000 or 445,000 will continue to come into Britain legally. That just goes to show you how far we've gone down the route of immigration. If we can lose 300,000 and yet we're still going to be lumbered with 440,000. What's your take on today's action?
I think it's extraordinary that you say that we're lumbered with health service workers.
Well, no, what I'm saying is people are rightly saying that they voted to take control of our borders in every election, actually, since 1997. What I'm saying is people would like, generally, in every election since 2010, to bring numbers down. In fact, that's been a manifesto pledge of every party since then. Gordon Brown even did this. So did Ed Miliband. What I'm saying is people want the numbers to come down, and today, despite the fact James Cleverly is saying they'll come down by 300,000, will still leave us with a huge figure.
Look, James Cleverly's a clown. He's saying there's going to be the largest single cut in migration because he's had the largest single rise in migration. I don't really care. I think if we need workers, we should get them into Britain. And if we need workers in the care sector and the health sector, they should be able to bring their dependents with them. Because what is it to imagine a woman or a man coming here and having to leave their family behind? We know they're on a track anyway. Health visas, care visas allow you to actually bring your family and settle here. So it's cruelty, it's stupidity, because we're going to end up with shortages of staff in the NHS and social care sector. And it is just it's a desperate sign of a government that's created a situation which, to my mind, isn't actually a big problem. People come into our country, they study, they contribute, they pay their fees, their families come here, they contribute to the economy. I'd love to hear what the actual government figures are on the knock-on effect on our economy if 300,000 people don't come next year. They put these figures into the budget red books. They put the figures in for the growth. I'm pretty sure these numbers take away the headroom that the Chancellor Exchequer claimed that he had. And what we're heading for is next year, we're going to have a winter crisis in the NHS this winter. We'll have another one next November, December, if they decide to go for a very long election, go to the end of the year for an election. How can anybody take this government seriously on immigration policy? They're just reversing a policy that they introduced themselves. They're trying to cut numbers that they increased themselves. There's no debate here about the right number of people in the economy. There's no debate here about the skills that we need. And you get the situation now where a British citizen, British born, could marry somebody who's foreign born, and they're not able to come here unless they've got a job earning over twice the national minimum wage. The whole thing is not about the national interest, not about the National Health Service interest. It's about the Tory party trying to placate their backbenchers.
Well, John, it's not surprising that you favour de facto open borders when you look back as a former Tony Blair advisor. That was basically your policy. Hang on, John.
I didn't say that.
John, let me have my say, mate. You've been talking plenty.
Don't you tell lies about what I said.
John, listen, John. In 1997. In 1997. No, I'm not. Look,
I never said open borders.
Let's be reasonable, John.
No, stop your lying. If you accept you told a lie when you said I want open borders, we could talk about it. But do not talk nonsense about what I said.
No,
honestly,
I'm going to say, John, de facto open borders effectively means
that's a lie.
The Tony Blair government, John, this works if we both get a say. Can I have my point now?
I'll tell you how it works. It works if you stop lying.
I'm not lying.
Stop lying.
Let's look at the details. Let's look at the details of Tony Blair's immigration policy from 1998 onwards. When Tony Blair invited the G8 economies, we saw an absolutely stratospheric increase in legal migration into this country. One, I would add, John, which paved the way for the Brexit referendum. And it hasn't ever stopped since. It got out of control in the 1990s. It's continued to do so, admittedly, under the Conservative government. I'm saying the legacy of de facto open borders, which I think we basically still have, has continued for decades. Moving it on to the present day, the Labour Party today are saying this is years of failed Tory policy, which many people, no doubt you, would agree with. But the big question is, what would the Labour Party now do about it?
I'd like to talk about the 1948 decision of the Attlee government to actually invest in the atomic bomb, have the nuclear deterrent from Britain, and then maybe talk about Polaris, which is the renewal by the Wilson government, and then maybe talk about Blair, renewing Trident. If you want to talk about history, you want to talk about things 26 years ago.
We're talking about immigration policy, not weapons making, John. Stay on point.
Seriously, man, you're asking me about a policy decision from 26 years ago.
Yes, I am.
We're talking about James Cleverly's announcement in the Commons today. Which is it? Is it a history lesson, or is it actually a discussion about the government's policy?
I'm making very clear parallels between Tony Blair's immigration policy, which you must admit people within the Labour Party at the time warned was getting out of control. Particularly, countries like Sweden didn't invite the G8 in, but the UK did under Blair's administration. And then we saw the beginnings of a huge spike in immigration into the UK, which rightly caused a lot of concerns, even within the Labour Party. They said this is getting out of control. Here we are again. I'm making the clear point that history is repeating itself. Blair had a problem. Now the Tories have got a problem. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
Okay, that's finally an interesting question. And the answer is, we need the workers in our country to get the economic growth that we want. We need the workers in our country to get the public services that we want. We should pay the workers a fairer wage than we do. The government aren't going to pay any more into social care, and they're not going to raise the fees that local government can pay. They're not going to raise the wages of social care workers. We either have workers from abroad, or we have homes unstaffed. We have workers from abroad, nurses from abroad, or we have wards unstaffed. We need loads of workers in the country. It's always been a great sense of pride for me that workers from all around the world, all across Europe, want to come and live in Britain, because Britain's the greatest country in the world, and with a growing economy, we always need new work. We always need new workers to come through. And what I don't understand is the mindset of people like yourself who are just asserting that somewhere in the ether there is a demand that we don't have nurses or care workers in our country.
No, John, that is not what's being said. What people are saying and have been saying at every general election, and particularly the Brexit referendum since 2010, is we want controls on immigration. The Labour Party said the same thing. It's people want controls. It's not about stopping care workers, not about pulling the drawbridge up. It's about controlling the numbers and making it fair and equitable. And that includes for people who can't get GP GP appointments, can't get school places, and feel that British wages for British workers are being suppressed. That is a valid viewpoint of millions and millions of voters in every election since 2010. It's not about saying we don't want care workers.
Have you got any idea where health workers come from? You've got, on the one hand, you're saying people can't access a GP, can't access the health service. On the other hand, you're saying you claim some people, a lot of people that don't want people to come into work in the health service. You need to sort this out. You've got to balance it. We need migration because we need the health service staff. If the health service is staffed, people can access GP's appointments. It's a very strange world you live in where you think you can stop people coming into the country and actually, in some magical way, have greater access to GPs. We don't bring GPs in from abroad. Don't bring nurses in from abroad. We've got 5, 6, 7 years to wait for people entering to train to do those jobs. So basically, the country voted to leave the European Union. It was stupid, an act of self-harm. This government has been trying to adjust to that. There have been immigration controls since we left the European Union. They've been set by the Tory government. If you've got a problem with that, you've got a problem with the Tory government, not with Tony Blair, who's not been in government for 16 years.
OK, John McTernan, former Tony Blair advisor. Always a pleasure, and it's good to have a robust exchange of views. And I got a lot of time for John, but I think a lot of people have to admit this didn't start 5 minutes ago. It's been going on for decades. Moving on, Nigel Farage is battling to be crowned King of the Jungle, and you can help him to win. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:48. You're watching or listening to me, Martin Daubney, on GB News. Now, my colleague Nigel Farage is, of course, currently starring in I Am a Celebrity, and the king of Brexit wants to become the king of the jungle. He's got this message for you.
I'm asking you to vote Remain. No, seriously, vote for me to remain in the jungle. Now, the easiest way to do it is to get the I'm a Celebrity app. That gives you 5 free votes. Or you can phone or text.
Now, if you want to register to vote for Mr. Farage, you'll need to grab your phone and scan that QR code you can see on your screen right now, which will allow you to download the I'm a Celebrity app. And as Nigel just said, you can vote for him 5 times per day. So get clicking. Your country needs you. I'm joined now by showbiz reporter Steph Tecci. Steph, always a pleasure to see you on the show. Here we go again. So Nigel survived. He didn't get the chop on last night's vote, although quite a few people will be surprised that it wasn't Nelly who went out, but Frankie Dettori who fell at the first hurdle.
Yes, I think there must have been a collective gasp last night, Martin, when people were watching to see who would be the first campmate that would be evicted from I'm a Celebrity. Most people thought it would have been Nella Rose because she's been quite a divisive character. She's been annoying the viewers at home. She's been annoying campmates by getting into heated debates. But no, she wasn't the one who got the chop. It was Frankie Dettori. And now I've got a few reasons why this could be. Nella Rose is an influencer. She does have lots of followers, and now that you can vote for people for free on the app, I can imagine a lot of younger people are taking this opportunity and voting to keep her in. Also, once you do leave the camp, you're back into the land of luxury, and I think viewers are still getting a kick out of making her do the Bush Tucker trial. So I think that is why Nella didn't go last night.
So I think there's a bit of a reverse ferret here. They'd rather keep her in and keep chucking rats and snakes at her.
Definitely, and there is that factor of entertainment value. When you think of the people who've had the most screen time, it's been Nella, it's been Nigel, it's been Sam Thompson. Unfortunately for Frankie Dettori, he didn't have much screen time, and if you haven't got that support like someone like Nigel Farage has or Nella Rose, you are going to be seeing all these less popular celebrities going. And to be honest, I don't even think Nelly will be the next one to go.
No, and of course, the thing is, Steph, you know, as people fall by the wayside, then people like Nigel will get more screen time. They can't airbrush him out if there are fewer and fewer people in there. I think getting over that first hurdle is really important. 2 have gone out for medical reasons, but nobody wants to be the first to get the old chop. I think Nigel's going to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's got a massive following. Obviously, he's got the GB News viewers who were supporting him, but I think as well he's managed to connect with a lot of people. I think ITV paid him £1.5 million to be on the show, apparently, but I think that's how much he did get paid to be a divisive character. And I don't think he has been a divisive character. I think he's been a very good sport, and I think people have actually loved him. He stood by his ground. He hasn't, you know, purposely tried to start arguments. So I think when it comes to the final, I'm predicting it's going to be an all-male final with Sam, Nigel and Fred.
Well, there's one to go for. And as I said all along, Steph, if it gets down to that stage, it will be a de facto Brexit referendum if Nigel gets to the final. Steph Tecci, always a pleasure, never a chore. And another pleasure, I've just been joined in the studio by Michelle Juby.
Hello.
Now, that dress next to that tree is like...
I decided to come dressed as a Christmas tree.
Beautiful.
I did. I mean, what is not to love about Christmas? I am well and truly into the Christmas spirit, I can tell you right now.
Well, you had your tree up about a month ago, didn't you?
I did. Honestly, I'd have it up all year round, actually, if it didn't die, because I do like a real one. It would be dead, wouldn't it? But yeah, I do love Christmas. I mean, look at this. Wonderful bookshelf packed full of all the festive stuff. I mean, it's fabulous, isn't it?
Someone told me those GB News baubles, those big ones behind us there, 17 quid a pair. I might nick a couple.
Are you going to steal them?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so tight. I don't think I would pay... Well, actually, I was going to say, would I pay £17 for 2 baubles? I probably would, actually, if they were GB News ones.
Well, there you go, they're right behind you.
I'm going to do a count. I'll do a head count of them all as I come in and as I go out. And at any time that they're going missing, we know now, don't we, who to point the finger at.
I've just announced. Right, got a quick minute. What's on your menu tonight?
Oh, yes. I, of course, want to unpick that massive announcement there from James Cleverly and his 5-point plan. There's more 5-point plans than I've had hot dinners. I have lost track now of how many 5-point plans there are. I don't know why. It must be like Politics 101. You know, when everything is going wrong, just randomly pull a 5-point plan out your armpit and hope that will fix everything. Or you could potentially pull it out of a different body part, but that's not for tea time television, is it? Anyway, so I want to unpick all of that. Is it actually going to work? I also want to look at Keir Starmer, his speech today as well. He's saying that many people have lost their future, basically, and of course he praised Margaret Thatcher, which so many people are pretty much crying about. How dare he have the audacity to say something nice or supportive about a political opponent. I want to talk as well about the potential bill going through Parliament soon about whether or not Harry and Meghan should have their royal titles, whether you care or not about their titles, and Harry and Meghan for that matter. Is that a good use of Parliament time? I don't know, you tell me.
OK, that's Jubes and Go. After the break, I'm back same time tomorrow. Stick around for Jubes and Go. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It stays wet for the rest of today in many places with a lot of cloud cover, but colder and clearer conditions remain in the far north and they will spread a bit more widely overnight and into Tuesday. We've got an area of low pressure tracking along southern parts and various weather systems wrapped around it, giving outbreaks of prolonged rain, especially for northeast England, southeast Scotland, risk of localised flooding here. And that combined with snow melt could lead to some large accumulations. Elsewhere, outbreaks of rain continuing overnight for the Midlands, parts of Wales and the southwest turning more showery later. But for northern Scotland, we've got rain and sleet showers combined with plummeting temperatures, so some icy patches first thing Tuesday here. And a frosty start for central and northern Scotland, as well as for parts of western Northern Ireland. That's where the coldest weather will be. The cold but clear conditions in the north eventually replace the grey but mild conditions elsewhere. The rain in the east turns to showers by the afternoon, drier and brighter further west with some sunny spells, and highs of 7 to 9 Celsius in the south, 3 or 4 further north. And then those temperatures fall away widely on Wednesday morning with widespread frost, some freezing fog patches first thing as well, for example, through the Vale of York, central and southern Scotland. Before the next area of rain moves in, that will lead to some hill snow in the north on Wednesday night into Thursday, milder by the end of the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, hello there. Enough is enough. That is according to James Cleverly, who's just made a major speech. He is talking about the amounts of migration into this country. I hate to break it to him. Many people would have said enough was enough a very long time ago. Anyway, there's plans now to slash the number by 300,000, which by my back of the fag packet calculations would still mean circa 450,000 people coming in on average a year. Can we sustain that? Worry not, though, he has got a 5-point plan, everyone. Oh, that's what we need. We'll be evaluating that and asking whether or not that is the answer to rising migration in this country. And Keir Starmer also giving a big speech today, but this time re the economy. He says the country no longer works the way it should and that people are facing a loss of their future. Is he right? He's also come in for a bit of a kicking for praising Margaret Thatcher. Controversial. Was he right to do so? And was she a force for good in this country? Also, we're waiting to see how much the BBC licence fee will be increasing by. Rishi Sunak and our Culture Secretary have said a planned £15 a year is way too much. How much should it be then? And do we even still need the licence fee? Also, get this right, a Tory MP is planning to present a bill to Parliament to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal titles. Now, whatever you think about their titles, I'm asking, is this a good use of Parliament's time? Yes, we'll be getting stuck into all of that. But before we do, let's cross live to Polly Middlehurst for tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Well, the top story this hour, as you've been hearing, the Home Secretary was speaking in the House of Commons today and he says 300,000 fewer people will be able to come to the UK each year under new plans to bring down legal migration. Overseas workers and students will be stopped from bringing family dependents with them. The minimum salary required for a skilled worker visa will also rise to £38,700 from next spring. And James Cleverly says the measures are the best way forward for British taxpayers.
British people will always do the right thing by those in need. But they also, and they are absolutely right to, want to reduce overall immigration numbers, not only by stopping the boats and shutting down illegal routes, but by well-managed reduction in legal migration too. People are understandably worried